Chapter 2441. Chapter 2441. Chapter 2441 Rebirth of Dharma Form. This question caused Tian Ting to hesitate slightly. It wasn't that Tian Ting was trying to hide something, but the answer seemed to be something that everyone knew. Of course, Tian Ting did not dare to hesitate. He immediately replied, entering the Master God battlefield can only be done with the teleportation token bestowed by the Divine Masters and Heavenly Kings. After all, once the Master God battlefield is closed, it will become a forbidden zone. As for the Kunlun Divine Domain, I have heard that it is possible to enter through some secret passageways. However, after the previous war with the Kunlun Divine Domain, these secret passageways have been sealed.
So you're saying there's no other way?
Yi Xian frowned slightly. When he heard that, he thought that Yi Xian was angry. He quickly continued, No, it's not like there's no chance at all. I've heard that each of the 8 great heavenly generals' palaces holds a special secret realm. That secret realm leads to both the Kunlun God Domain and the Demon God Domain. Yi Xian frowned again. What's the use of that? Do you want me to kill those divine generals and steal the two-way secret realm? Heaven Listener was momentarily at a loss for words, feeling flustered as he tried to say something. However, Yi Xian waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything more, because the information provided by Tian Ting did not seem to be of any real use. Of course, it was good to know that there were 8 two-way secret realms. Perhaps he could give it a try in the future. Yi Xian looked at the Heavenly Listener Beast. The Heavenly Listener Beast's innate divine ability was not bad, and it could be used by Yi Xian. It was a pity to kill it just like that.
With a wave of his hand, the Heavenly Listener Beast was sucked into the devouring space.
After all, once it entered the devouring space, the Heavenly Listener Beast would be completely under Yi Xian's control. From then on, it would not be able to go against Yi Xian's wishes. Who said that Yi Xian knew that the Heavenly Listener Beast would not be of much use to him in the short term after absorbing it into the devouring space. However, as the Tree of Laws grew, the devouring space would gradually become stronger, and it might be useful in the future. Unexpectedly, even the Heavenly Listener Beast did not have many clues. Yi Xian shook his head in disappointment. His gaze quickly gathered on the surrounding mythological beasts. These divine beasts were all geniuses of the Demon God Domain. Perhaps in the future, they would become the enemies of the Kunlun God Domain and Yi Xian. Therefore, Yi Xian hardened his heart and prepared to kill them all. These geniuses of the Demon God Domain, rather than leaving them alive to become enemies in the future, it was better to kill them all now. That's right. Yi Xian was going to massacre everyone in this place because Yi Xian knew full well that the people here would one day become the enemy of the Kunlun God Domain and Yi Xian himself. What's more, even if Yi Xian didn't do anything, Xianxia probably wouldn't let these people off. It could be said that none of these geniuses had not eaten humans before. In the eyes of these so-called geniuses of the Demon God Domain, humans were just food. So what reason did Yi Xian have to give them a chance to live? Wei Zhentian, Dharma Treasure Form, kill them all. Following Yi Xian's order, Wei Zhentian instantly activated and controlled the 2 God-Slayer swords to rush out. At the same time, Xianxia also rushed out. Since the establishment of the Aquamoon Cave abode, this was the first time it had encountered a bloodbath. The other meaning of geniuses was that they were not strong enough. The reason why they were called geniuses was because they had high potential, but it didn't mean that they were strong enough. Perhaps in the future, they could all become strong, but at least for now, they weren't that strong. And Yi Xian wouldn't give them the time to grow. The God-Slayer swords danced in the air, and the geniuses fell one after another. The entire Aquamoon Cave abode was filled with whales. One by one, the divine beasts and geniuses transformed into their original forms and tried to resist or escape. Unfortunately, it was useless. Yi Xian and Xianxia were like 2 killing gods, killing everything in their path. 1, 2, 3. Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to remember how many divine beasts and geniuses he had killed, because there was no need to. As long as an enemy appeared in his sight, none of them would escape. However, the havoc didn't last long. During this time, the elders in the Aquamoon Cave abode had never stopped looking for Yi Xian and Xianxia. Now that the 2 of them had appeared, they naturally attracted the elders' attention. Boy, how dare you act so presumptuously in the Aquamoon Cave abode? You're courting death. An elder quickly rushed towards Yi Xian, his body constantly emitting strong light. While rushing towards Yi Xian, He had already activated his gifted superpower. This was an expert who had cultivated from a giant porcupine. It could be said that he was the pride of the porcupine clan. After all, porcupines were generally less talented. It was rare for them to cultivate to the Divine Emperor realm. And this Divine Beast expert was a lower rank 7 Divine Emperor. Unfortunately, a lower rank 7 Divine Emperor was nothing in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't even bother to recall the Godslayer. He just casually threw a punch and a strong force instantly erupted. Boom! One punch. With just one punch, Yi Xian sent Elder Porcupine flying. However, the punch didn't take Elder Porcupine's life. Elder Porcupine was terrified after being sent flying by Yi Xian's punch. He stood in the distance, coughing up blood. He didn't dare to move forward. However, at this time, the other 2 elders had arrived. They first glanced at Elder Porcupine, then looked at each other and rushed towards Yi Xian. Ding! System notification. The target is a middle rank 4 Divine Emperor. The host is advised to dodge immediately. 3 levels higher than Yi Xian? Indeed, he was very strong. However, Yi Xian's title of eternal supremacy was not just for show. It was only 3 levels higher, so Yi Xian didn't put him in his eyes.
The 2 elders transformed into their true forms because they were the kind of divine beasts that could only display their greatest combat strength in their true forms.
These 2 elders were actually a tiger and a lion. Roar! 2 angry roars sounded. The 2 powerful divine beasts had already launched their attacks. They started with a tiger's roar and lion's roar. Violent sound waves erupted, forming a huge whirlwind that rushed towards Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian didn't care about this kind of attack. Yi Xian waved his hand, and a strong force was launched, scattering the whirlwind. The 2 divine beasts' elders attacked again. After transforming into their true forms, they didn't use any magic weapons. This was because their true forms had long been trained to surpass most magic weapons. Even if they waved their hands, there would be a huge flash of light that wasn't any weaker than the light of a magic weapon. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes, put his hands together, and immediately activated a Dharma idol. The Dharma idol of the Glorious Empress. The Glorious Empress was once a strong person in the realm of the gods. She was skilled in several magical powers that could be said to be unbeatable. Chapter 2442. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios Empress of Splendor. The second mystique was called Glorious Glory. This was a mystique that could use the power of the law of light to condense a giant singularity and cause explosive damage. This mystique could cause great damage within a certain range for a short period of time.
When combined with the first mystique, it could naturally cause great damage to the enemy.
In addition to these 2 mystiques, the third mystique was undoubtedly even more terrifying. This third mystique was called Glorious Destruction.
Once this mystique was activated, the target that was locked on would be continuously injured by a giant pillar of light that descended from the sky as long as they were under the light.
The body of 10,000 sovereign was difficult to obtain and had a long cooldown time. However, there was no doubt that the explosive damage was extremely terrifying. At this moment, Yi Xian summoned the Glorious Empress of Splendor Dharma. As soon as it appeared, a terrifying pressure descended. The 2 elders, 1 tiger and 1 lion, were slightly stunned, but they did not give up on attacking. Instead, they continued to charge towards Yi Xian. As the 2 elders charged forward, they actually fused together and activated their combined mystique, the Tiger-Lion Frenzy Demon. The Tiger-Lion Frenzy Demon was a combination technique that the 2 elders had perfected over tens of thousands of years of tacit cooperation. It could be said that once the 2 of them activated this mystique, it was equivalent to perfectly fusing their powers together. The explosive attack power was not as simple as 1 + 1. Wherever the 2 of them ran, the clouds and fog dispersed. Due to their extreme speed, there was even an extremely powerful whirlwind around their bodies to protect them. Unfortunately, even so, it was useless. Dance for me. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up into a smile. With a casual wave of his hand, the brilliant dance divine ability immediately descended. The 2 elders were stunned to discover that their bodies couldn't help but stop. They were even attracted by some mysterious power of law and danced on the spot. Although this time was very short, it was enough to make them panic. This was because Yi Xian's new attack had already arrived. Glorious Glory. A huge ball of light directly surrounded the 2 of them. Then, the ball of light quickly shrank. Yi Xian looked at the ball of light and said faintly, Boom! While Yi Xian was speaking, the ball of light had already condensed to its limit. Suddenly, there was a loud bang and it exploded. Boom! With a deafening boom, the condensing light energy exploded in an instant. The powerful energy directly enveloped the two elders.
After the explosion, the two elders were covered in blood and had no choice but to fall to the ground.
But as soon as they landed, Yi Xian had no intention of letting them go. Glorious destruction! A beam of light descended from the sky.
Before this, those two elders were standing together because they used their fusion innate techniques.
But now, they became the reason for their deaths. In an instant, even the elders felt as if their bodies were melting. As a matter of fact, their bodies were indeed melting.
The power of the law of light, no matter how tough one's body was, as long as it hadn't reached the point where the light couldn't be broken, it could be refined.
This glorious annihilation used the law of light to destroy the enemy through the means of refining weapons.
In other words, glorious destruction was refining the enemies within the light as materials.
Of course, there would never be a result because the final result would be melting. What a terrifying scene this was. Two powerful elders of the Water Moon Cavern actually melted in front of everyone's eyes. At this moment, the surrounding elders didn't dare to make a move. They all looked at Yi Xian in horror. One of them asked Yi Xian loudly, "Who are you, sir? What grudge do you have with the Water Moon Cavern?" The Water Moon Cavern is a public cavern built in response to the orders of the Divine Master. Any prodigy can enter to cultivate and stand aloof from worldly affairs. Why are you looking for trouble with the Water Moon Cavern? Yi Xian shook his head silently. Perhaps the Water Moon Cavern was aloof from worldly affairs in the demon god domain. Unfortunately, the divine beast prodigies you nurtured would one day appear in the Master God battlefield and become enemies with the Kunlun god domain. Then, Yi Xian would never let them go. Yi Xian ignored the elders.
With a wave of his hand, he swallowed the interspatial rings left behind by the two elders, one tiger and one lion.
Yi Xian's calmness made the surrounding elders even more uncertain. After all, no one knew what Yi Xian's trump card was. Ouyang Shui, on the other hand, relied on her profound realm. Although she didn't have such powerful means like Yi Xian, she still killed several elders of the demon god domain. Under their hands, who knew how many divine beast prodigies they had killed? What do you want, sir? Why are you making an enemy out of the Water Moon Cavern? If the Water Moon Cavern is wrong, we are willing to compensate you for your loss. Please stop immediately. Another elder spoke up. This elder's true form was a dark unicorn. Therefore, there was a black aura lingering around him. Yi Xian looked at these people indifferently. However, he didn't really intend to let go. Of course, Yi Xian knew that once these elders all attacked, even Yi Xian wouldn't be able to withstand them. What's more, the Water Moon Cavern Master and several experts had yet to appear. Once they did, Yi Xian wouldn't be a match for them. Yi Xian understood the principle of quitting while he was ahead. However, it would be a waste if he didn't ruthlessly extort the Water Moon Cavern Master. Fine, I can stop. However, your Water Moon Cavern Master's disciples have eaten my clansmen. How are you going to settle this? Yi Xian's words weren't fake at all. Weren't humans treated as food by these divine beasts? However, Yi Xian didn't say that he was a human. After all, if he said that he was a human, it would only cause those elders to madly attack him. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the elders seemed to understand something. However, it was obvious that they had misunderstood. In the demon god's domain, it was very normal for many powerful races to eat the weaker races as food. However, this precondition was strength. If one's strength wasn't enough, they would be eaten by others instead. Then, they deserved to be unlucky. At this time, the elders obviously misunderstood Yi Xian's meaning. They thought that Yi Xian's clansmen had been killed and eaten by the Water Moon Cavern Master's disciples, so they came to seek revenge. So that's how it is. However, you're being a little unreasonable. Which clan of Water Moon Cavern Master's disciples did this? You can find trouble with his clan. Why are you targeting the entire Water Moon Cavern Master? Oh, is that so? Then those disciples said that they were from Water Moon Cavern Master and no one dared to hurt them. How do you explain this matter? Anyway, it was nonsense. Yi Xian didn't care so much. What? Is that so? Hearing Yi Xian's answer, the elders were obviously angry. At this time, a red figure descended from the sky. Greetings, Great Elder.
It turned out that the Great Elder of Water Moon Cavern Master had arrived.
Ding. System prompt. Target is a 7th stage Divine Emperor. The host is advised to dodge immediately. Chapter 2443. Deterrence. There was no way Yi Xian could resist the Grand Elder. Yi Xian was on high alert. He had already decided that if the Grand Elder made a move, he would run away immediately. However, the Grand Elder's next words made Yi Xian stop in his tracks. Since it was the fault of my Water Moon Abode's disciples, then we must compensate them. Kid, take the resources in this interspatial ring as your compensation. With a wave of his hand, the Grand Elder actually gave Yi Xian an interspatial ring. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why was this guy so easy to talk to? No, things weren't that simple. Sure enough, the Grand Elder spoke again. Kid, your 10-tailed Divine Fox clan lives in seclusion in the unworldly secret realm. When did you enter the mainland? 10-tailed Divine Fox clan? Suddenly, Yi Xian thought of Empress Splendor's true form. Empress Splendor's true form was actually a 10-tailed Divine Fox clan. The Grand Elder clearly misunderstood and thought that he was a member of the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan. After all, the 3 Empress Splendor's abilities that Yi Xian used were the innate abilities of the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan. Yi Xian understood the Grand Elder's point and smirked. Who cares about the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan? Yi Xian couldn't care less. As long as he got the benefits, it was enough. Let's go. Yi Xian waved his hand and led Xianxia away, ignoring the Grand Elder. Clearly, the Grand Elder was extremely wary of the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan. Seeing Yi Xian and Xianxia leave, some of the ordinary elders didn't understand the Grand Elder's actions and asked, Grand Elder, are we just going to let them go like this? They killed so many of our disciples. What should we do when the clansmen of our disciples investigate? The Grand Elder looked back at the other elders and said calmly, Tell them if they have any objections, they can go find the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan and ask for punishment. That is, as long as they have the guts. Grand Elder, what's so special about the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan? Why are you so afraid? Lord Divine Master's true form is really the 10-tailed Divine Fox. What do you think will happen if the Divine Master finds out that one of his clansmen was eaten by a disciple of our Aquamoon Heavenly Cave? Don't think I don't know that your clansmen were also killed by this person, but I'll tell you the truth. You better pray that this person won't find trouble with you. Otherwise, the day of your clan's annihilation won't be far away. What? Almost all of the Water Moon sect's elders were aghast. Very few people knew what the true form of the Demon God Realm's Divine Lord was, but they didn't expect the Great Elder to know. If that was the case, they would be willing to hand over the entire clan's resources, not to mention exchanging resources for safety. Almost immediately, all the elders found their own juniors and began to teach them a lesson without any hesitation. Because they knew very well in their hearts that if this matter was not handled properly, it would lead to the destruction of their entire clan. To challenge the Divine Master's original race, wasn't that just courting death? Of course, Yi Xian didn't know that he had accidentally impersonated a member of the same clan as the Demon God's God Realm's God Master. At this moment, Yi Xian had already opened the interspatial ring given to him by the Great Elder. However, when he saw the resources in the interspatial ring, Yi Xian was pleasantly surprised. Originally, he had only left because the Great Elder had given him a way out of this embarrassing situation. However, he had never expected that the Great Elder would really give him compensation. Furthermore, it was such a generous compensation. It could be said that the resources in the interspatial ring given by the Great Elder were dozens of times more than all of the resources on Yi Xian's body combined. Of course, this was half of the Water Moon Cave Abode's inventory, so it was naturally a lot. System. Classify the resources. Keep the resources that are useful to me, and devour the rest. Following Yi Xian's command, the system immediately sorted the resources. Soon, the results were out. Among the thousands of resources, only a dozen were determined by the system to be useful to Yi Xian. The rest were devoured by Yi Xian directly. Ding! System notification. Host has broken through to rank 3 medium Divine Emperor realm. 2 realms in a row. Yi Xian was very satisfied with this result. As expected, robbing was the only way to get more resources and benefits. After Yi Xian left the Water Moon Cave abode, he led Yi Xian forward. After all, Although Yi Xian was fearless in the Water Moon Cave abode, it didn't mean that he didn't understand the difference in strength. In the Water Moon Cave abode, even the Great Elder was not a match for Yi Xian, let alone the cave master. Therefore, Yi Xian was prepared to rob other places. This time, Yi Xian's goal was to find the saints. The demon god's god realm had described the saints to be so powerful. Yi Xian wanted to see how different these saints were. Yi Xian's first target was Mount Wuwang, which was the closest to the Water Moon Cave abode. The Divine Crocodile clan lived in Mount Wuwang, and there was a saint in the Divine Crocodile clan. Yi Xian's intention was very simple. He wanted to meet the saint of the Divine Crocodile clan. According to Tian, the saint of the Divine Crocodile clan was also a medium Divine Emperor realm elite. His strength was comparable to Yi Xian's. Therefore, Yi Xian wanted to see how powerful this saint was. In fact, Yi Xian wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. However, all the passages were sealed. It seemed that the only thing he could rely on was the two-way secret realm controlled by the 8 great divine generals. However, the 8 great divine generals were not easy to deal with. Therefore, Yi Xian wanted to return to the Kunlun god realm, but he didn't have the strength. Besides, in the monster god realm, Yi Xian's cultivation speed would undoubtedly be much faster. After all, Yi Xian could kill all the divine beasts in the monster god realm without any fear and increase his strength quickly. After all, Yi Xian remembered clearly that the law contract with the 2 sacred halls was 10,000 years old. Yi Xian also remembered clearly how powerful that mysterious secret realm was. Therefore, the only way was to increase his level quickly. There were 3 things to do. First, find Luo Luo's whereabouts. Second, return to the Kunlun god realm. Third, find a way to increase his cultivation speed quickly, and then go to the mysterious secret realm to train. These were the 3 most important things to Yi Xian now. Therefore, Yi Xian wanted to find the other saints. After all, looking for the other saints would allow him to accomplish these 3 things at the same time. Looking for the saints would allow him to find out Luo Luo's whereabouts through the other saints. Even if one of them couldn't do it, there would be 10, or even 100. There was bound to be one who knew about Luo Luo's existence. Killing the saints would undoubtedly allow him to increase his cultivation level quickly and strengthen himself. Then, he would be able to enter the mysterious secret realm to train faster. At the same time, every saint had a lot of resources in their hands. Perhaps they could find a way to enter the Kunlun god realm. Therefore, the saints were Yi Xian's best choice now. Chapter 2444. Poor Humans. Wuwang Mountain was once a ruin left behind after the excavation of a spirit stone mine. However, after millions of years of changes, divine trees and divine flowers grew here again. At the same time, it also triggered some changes, turning these ruins into a flourishing holy land. The Divine Crocodile clan was not originally the divine beasts of this place, but when they discovered the natural spiritual pond, they did not leave. They forcibly drove away the surrounding divine beasts and occupied this Wuwang Mountain. The Crocodile God clan spent most of their time cultivating in the spirit pool. Only a portion of the guards were left behind to guard the area. After all, in the past, when they occupied the Endless Mountain, they had also committed quite a number of massacres. Thus, they had no choice but to be on guard at all times. Even now, the Divine Crocodile tribe did not dare to let down their guard. At this time, Yi Xian and Xianxia were walking along Wuwang Mountain. Unexpectedly, Xianxia suddenly thought of something. Big brother Yi, I remember this place. In the ruins of Mount Wuwang, there is a human village. I came here when I was young. Their village is one of the few human villages that can settle down in one place. Human village? Ever since he had come to the demon god domain, Yi Xian had mostly heard about how the human clan was bullied, but in reality, he had not seen many humans. Since there was such an opportunity, Yi Xian naturally did not want to let it go. All right, let's go to this village first. As Yi Xian nodded in agreement, Xianxia quickly led the way for the 2 of them. This place was originally just a wasteland, so it was naturally not that easy to pass through. The ruins of a spirit stone mine were different from the ruins of an ordinary mine. This was because spirit stone veins were special substances produced by the world, so they were naturally protected by the laws. Even though all the spirit stones in the veins had been dug up, the laws still protected them. Almost every spirit stone vein digger knew a legend. That was, even if the spirit stone vein ruins were completely excavated, It wouldn't take long for a new mother lode to form, thus giving birth to a new spirit stone vein. What is a mother lode? That was a treasure that countless people yearned for. It would be of great use to anyone who obtained it. There were two main characteristics of the mother Oregon. The first was that it automatically gathered the divine power between heaven and earth to produce all kinds of minerals. Actually, everyone knew this without saying. The most important thing was his second characteristic, which was known to very few people. That was the blessing of the laws. Those who possessed the mother lode would be able to obtain special blessings when cultivating laws. Of course, it was extremely difficult to obtain the mother lode. Even in a mineral vein, there was no guarantee that a mother or would be born. That thing was simply an existence that could only be found by chance. Now that Yixian had arrived at the mineral vein ruins, he naturally had some expectations. System, activate all detection and try to find the mother lode. Yixian instructed the system, and the two of them proceeded forward. Unfortunately, the legend was true. It was extremely difficult to obtain the mother lode. Along the way, Yixian did not receive any notifications from the system. In other words, he did not find the mother lode. However, just as Yixian was about to give up, the system notification sounded. Ding! System notification. Attention! Host. Traces of the mother lode have been detected ahead. There really was a mother lode. It was a pleasant surprise. What's ahead? Yixian asked Xianxia. Xianxia glanced at Yixian in surprise before saying, "The village is right in front of us." Xianxia was surprised because she thought that Yixian had discovered the uniqueness of this place. However, she did not know that Yixian had only detected the presence of the mother lode. Yixian heard Xianxia's answer and did not say much. He just continued forward. After walking for a while, the two of them found a cave, and that cave was the entrance. The most peculiar thing was that outside the cave, there was actually the power of the laws. These laws seemed to form a door, cleverly hiding the cave. In other words, unless one saw it with their eyes, they would not be able to discover it with their divine senses. In fact, for the strong most of the time, they would trust their divine senses more than their eyes. Therefore, even if a divine beast powerhouse passed by, if they did not find anything unusual with their divine senses, they would not investigate. The cave was very well hidden, so even if someone came down to investigate, it would be difficult to find anything special. It was no wonder that the human village could hide in this cave for so long. All of this was because of the hidden door constructed by the laws. At this time, Yixian had some understanding. He was afraid that this gate of laws had a certain connection with the mother lode. Perhaps it was very likely that the mother lode was actually the one guarding this village. The two of them carefully walked into the cave. According to Xianxia, the people of the village had arranged countless mechanisms and traps in this cave. Although these mechanisms and traps would not threaten Yixian, the people of the village had worked hard to arrange these traps. Yixian did not want to destroy them. After all, these were all set up by the people of the village to prevent the intrusion of divine beasts. Fortunately, Xianxia was familiar with this place. In addition, Yixian's divine sense was powerful, so they were not in any danger. Soon, the two of them arrived at the interior of the cave. Vaguely, Yixian could see the light of a fire clearly. Who are you? Suddenly, there was a loud roar. Then, several humans rushed out, holding simple spears in their hands. These spears were not magical weapons, but were woven from some kind of vines. One could imagine how powerful they were. But these were their only weapons. "We are humans. Everyone, don't worry," Xianxia hurriedly said. Sure enough, when these people heard that they were humans, they were less afraid. However, they did not relax their vigilance. When they saw Yixian and Xianxia walk out, these people finally recognized that they were humans. "You are little Xue?" An older man looked at Xianxia and asked in surprise. "Yes, I am Xianxia. Hello, Uncle Lin." Meeting an acquaintance undoubtedly made these people very happy. Humans lived a life of fear and trepidation in the demon-divine realm. For example, in this village, there were many people who had never left in their entire lives. And those who did leave, most never returned. Yixian and Xianxia were given a grand reception. It could be said that this village had taken out the best things to entertain Yixian. Chapter 2445. Mine mother lode by mistake. The first type was a moss-like plant that grew in the cave. It tasted very bitter, but it was the favorite food of the people here because it was very common. The second type was a white worm that grew in the cave. It tasted very bad and was very disgusting, but it was a delicacy for the people in the cave because it was the only meat they could eat. The third type was a type of ore. This ore had very special characteristics and could be used as food. It could be said that the living conditions here were extremely bad. At this moment, Yi Xian felt very bitter. After all, these people were Yi Xian's people. They were all humans, but they didn't expect to live like this. In the cave, there was a hole that wasn't very big, but that hole went through more than 10 twists and turns. After a few twists and turns, the people in the cave used a mirror made of crystal stones to project sunlight to the bottom of the cave. This was the only place where the people in the cave were exposed to sunlight. Fortunately, this was the realm of the gods. The 10 suns in the sky alternated, so the sunlight here was quite abundant. Unfortunately, there were only hard stones in the cave and no soil at all, so there was no way to grow any plants. Of course, there was no way to keep any divine beasts in captivity. Yi Xian looked at all of this in silence. In front of him, there was a house made of stones. This was the only house in the cave. There was no one living in this house, but a stone was enshrined. It was the Mother Lode. The Mother Lode was worshipped as a guardian deity here. Yi Xian had long given up on the idea of obtaining the Mother Lode. At the same time, he wanted to move the people here. Therefore, when these people were happily asking Xianxia about the situation outside, Yi Xian proposed his idea. I want to take you away from here. Are you willing? Yi Xian didn't hesitate and asked these people directly. Xianxia was stunned at first, but then her face revealed an expression of ecstasy. During this period of interaction, Xianxia was the one who knew the most about Yi Xian's strength. Yi Xian had countless secrets on him, and at the same time, he had an extremely strong foundation. Now that Yi Xian had taken the initiative to move the people in the village, it was undoubtedly the best outcome. Therefore, before those people could answer, Xianxia excitedly persuaded them first. Yi Xian waited silently. He could suggest ideas, but the choice was up to these people. After all, Yi Xian wouldn't force them. Soon, the people in the village came to a decision.
In the demon god domain, the human clan was unusually united, because everyone was very clear about what kind of environment they were in.
If they wanted to survive from the jaws of those powerful demon beasts, they could only rely on the unity of the human clan. Therefore, when they heard Xianxia's persuasion, none of them had any doubts at all. After all, they had long heard of how powerful the Kunlun god domain was. In their hearts, the Kunlun god domain was a sacred ground. Now that they had such an opportunity, even if they knew that it would be extremely dangerous, they were still willing to take the risk. However, they had misunderstood Yi Xian. Yi Xian wanted to bring them to a safer and more comfortable place. That was Yi Xian's devouring space. This time, Yi Xian had even specially modified this area so that he could accept more people from the demon god domain in the future. In this place, Yi Xian had built palaces after palaces, circled out all kinds of delicious food, and hoarded large amounts of cultivation resources, all to provide these people with the most perfect living and cultivation environment possible. In fact, Yi Xian had also noticed the uniqueness of this place, and that was that everyone here had astonishing talent and potential. Perhaps, those without talent had already been eliminated long ago. Of those who were left, 9 out of 10 could be considered geniuses in the Kunlun god domain. Of course, this didn't mean that Yi Xian didn't have any selfish motives. After all, Yi Xian had allowed these people to cultivate and become stronger, so that he could use them for his own purposes.
In the devouring space, due to the constant modification of the 12 abyssal trees, the cultivation environment was getting better and better.
Therefore, Yi Xian believed that these people would like it there. In fact, these people didn't just like it. In their hearts, this place was like a holy land. It was even more perfect than a holy land. After settling the problem of the village, Yi Xian started to think about how to deal with the alligator god clan. From these people, Yi Xian already knew that this village was actually built under the alligator god clan's spiritual pool. The alligator god clan's natural department might have allowed other divine beasts to inspect their spiritual pool, which could be considered as protecting this place indirectly. After all, the power in the spiritual pool came from the mysterious Mother Lode. Therefore, it was inevitable that Yi Xian wanted to take away the Mother Lode, which would naturally affect the interests of the alligator god clan. In fact, it would affect the core interests of the Alligator God clan. After all, taking away the mother lode meant that Yi Xian wanted to take away the source of power of the Alligator God clan's spiritual pool. Therefore, when Yi Xian put these people into the devouring space, he didn't dare to act rashly. Yi Xian wasn't afraid of going against an entire clan by himself, but he also knew that this wasn't a wise choice. After all, Yi Xian didn't know what kind of experts the Alligator God clan had. At this time, Xianxia stood quietly beside Yi Xian. Xianxia didn't know how precious the mother lode was, so she was slightly puzzled when she saw Yi Xian standing there in a daze. "Big brother Yi, is there anything else?" Xianxia asked Yi Xian. In Xianxia's heart, Yi Xian's strength was unquestionable. Therefore, Xianxia didn't know why Yi Xian was standing there in a daze. Yi Xian was deep in thought at this time, so he didn't think too much about it. He replied casually, "I'm thinking, how can I take the mother lode?" As he spoke, Yi Xian pointed at the mother lode. Xianxia didn't know how powerful the mother lode was. When she saw Yi Xian pointing at the mother lode, she flew over and took it down. "Big brother Yi, do you want this thing?" Xianxia blinked her eyes as she quietly asked Yi Xian. As for Yi Xian, he was incomparably shocked. Why did you take it down?" At this time, Yi Xian could feel that the energy that was constantly pouring into the mother lode had disappeared. Yi Xian couldn't help but be shocked. It could be said that the Alligator God clan definitely knew the secret of the spiritual pool. The reason why they didn't take the mother lode was that they were worried that taking the mother lode would affect the spiritual pool. Now that the energy of the spiritual pool had disappeared, even the Alligator God clan would know that something had happened under the spiritual pool. Yi Xian didn't dare to delay any longer. He grabbed Xianxia and wanted to leave. Chapter 2446. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. The god-slaying sword was evolving. Boom! 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 A series of explosions rang out as the experts of the Alligator clan landed at the bottom of the lake. These experts were obviously more interested in the mother lode than Yi Xian had imagined. They had surrounded Yi Xian as soon as they appeared. In other words, Yi Xian's every move was under the surveillance of the Alligator clan. The reason why they had not done anything was because they did not care about the human village at the bottom of the spiritual pool. They did not care about Yi Xian at all. Now that Yi Xian had taken the mother lode, the Alligator clan had no choice but to take action. "Damn it! How dare you take the holy stone? You're courting death!" One of the experts of the Alligator clan shouted at Yi Xian. They knew about the mother lode. However, this mother lode was special. Otherwise, they would not have called it the holy stone. A total of 9 powerful experts from the divine Alligator clan completely surrounded Yi Xian and Xianxia. Through the system, Yi Xian knew that even the weakest amongst these people had reached the 3rd level of the Divine Emperor realm. As for the strongest person, he was actually a 6th level Divine Emperor realm expert. Yi Xian could not resist at all. This was the biggest crisis that Yi Xian had ever encountered. What should I do? Yi Xian thought quickly. 9 experts of the Alligator clan had surrounded Yi Xian. If he attacked now, he would be courting death. Even if he wanted to escape, it was impossible. In that instant, Yi Xian quickly thought about his trump card. Unfortunately, it was useless. Yi Xian did not have any trump card to fight against the 9 experts of the Alligator clan. Once he attacked, he would definitely die. After all, in addition to the level 6 Divine Emperor, there were 2 other level 6 Divine Emperors. The honorable rank title allowed Yi Xian to be invincible among those of the same level. He could even challenge those of a higher level in a one-on-one battle. However, that didn't mean that Yi Xian could fight against 3 high-level Divine Emperors. If they fought, they would definitely lose. Run. There was no escape. Of course, it wasn't impossible for him to release the sword attendant, but don't forget, this was the territory of the Divine Alligator clan. As for these 9 people, Yi Xian didn't believe that they were all the experts of the Divine Alligator clan. To put it bluntly, these 9 people were just a team of guards for the Alligator God clan. Xianxia, don't resist. I will send you away. You will only be a burden to me if you stay here. At this moment, Yi Xian couldn't care less. Originally, Yi Xian didn't intend to absorb Xianxia into his devouring space. However, under the current circumstances, he had no choice but to do so. Therefore, Yixian casually took Ouyang Shui into his devouring space. Just as Yixian had said, without Ouyang Shui around, Yixian had less to worry about. At the same time, the mother lode was in Yixian's hands. At that moment, the system notification rang out. Ding! System notification. Detected special resource, Sacred Heart Mother Lode. At this moment, Yixian hadn't noticed. He was quickly thinking of a countermeasure to deal with the system notification. However, the God-Slayer reacted on its own. This was a situation that Yixian had never encountered ever since he had obtained the God-Slayer. One had to know that the God-Slayer now had Wei Zhentian as its weapon spirit. However, Wei Zhentian couldn't control the God-Slayer. It was obvious that things weren't that simple. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, a strange change had begun. From the sky, 9 brilliant pillars of light suddenly appeared. What was even more strange was that once the 9 pillars of light reached the God-Slayer, they rapidly condensed. Absorb. It was absorbing. The God-Slayer was actually absorbing the power of the 9 pillars of light at a rapid speed. Even though Yixian didn't know what kind of power the 9 pillars of light represented, Yixian knew that this wasn't a simple matter. Boom! Another loud sound was heard. An extremely powerful elite from the divine crocodile tribe descended. Just his aura alone was enough to make Yixian's hair stand on end. Stop him quickly. We can't let him take away the power of the mystic light. The elite shouted as soon as he appeared. The 9 elites from the divine crocodile tribe didn't hesitate at all. They all rushed toward Yixian at the same time. Yixian was shocked. Even if 2 or 3 of them joined forces, Yixian would have a hard time dealing with them, let alone 9 of them. Furthermore, there was a super elite among them. At this moment, Yixian was even prepared to enter the engulfing space to temporarily escape. However, what happened next made Yixian stop in his tracks. At the same time, he was extremely shocked. Although the 9 of them rushed toward Yixian, they were stopped by a strange energy before they could even get close to Yixian. It was formless and colorless. Neither the naked eye nor the divine consciousness could detect it at all. However, the effect was obvious. At this moment, the 9 of them were blocked outside and couldn't enter at all. Yixian could clearly hear their angry roars. Yixian could also clearly feel their attacks. However, even their attacks in themselves couldn't enter the range of that ring. Yixian didn't understand why, but he knew that he was temporarily safe. At this moment, the super elite from the divine crocodile tribe looked regretful. This was because only he knew that the mother ore wasn't an ordinary mother Oregon. He also knew that this mother ore was special. There were countless rare treasures in this world. There were naturally many rare treasures that could be used to refine and strengthen Dharma treasures. Some treasures might look ordinary on the surface, but they were extremely powerful. However, some treasures were hidden among the myriad of treasures. Those who didn't know the value of these treasures would never discover them. This mother ore was such a special mother Oregon. The most important thing about this mother ore wasn't the material itself, but its special properties. This mother ore could be used as a guide to guide the power of the mysterious light to refine Dharma treasures. Just like what was being done to the god-slaying sword now. Dharma treasures refined by the mysterious light were definitely not ordinary treasures. A Dharma treasure refined in this way would be greatly strengthened in all aspects, and its quality would also be improved. Therefore, such a rare treasure could be said to be a good item that could only be found by chance. At this moment, the super elite was extremely regretful. If he had been as blind as a bat and hadn't failed to recognize this mother ore, he wouldn't have missed this opportunity. It should be known that such a rare treasure's special ability could only be used once. Therefore, after Yixian used this mother ore, this originally incomparably magical mother ore was now useless. Thinking back, although the divine crocodile tribe had discovered that this mother ore could allow the spirit pool to gather mysterious energy, they hadn't thought much about it. They had mistakenly thought that the spirit pool was special. However, who would have thought that this would be the result when the mystery was revealed? Not only had they not obtained such a rare treasure, but the spirit pool had also been destroyed. How could the divine crocodile tribe accept this? Chapter 2447. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio had become a treasure. Since they couldn't get the mother lode, the divine crocodile tribe elites decided to take the Godslayer instead. The mysterious power continued to pour into the Godslayer, causing it to rapidly undergo huge changes. Outside, More and more elites from the divine crocodile tribe rushed in and surrounded Yixian. Inside, Yixian could only look at the god-slayer silently and wait. Of course, Yixian was also thinking of a countermeasure. The current situation was obvious. The divine crocodile tribe was determined to get the mother lode and the god-slayer. Once the light disappeared, the evolution would end and the battle would begin. The divine wood sword attendant had already been released by Yixian. After all, the divine wood sword attendant possessed an incomparably powerful defense. Perhaps, relying on this powerful defense would be able to bring Yixian a chance of survival. To be more precise, Yixian wouldn't let go of any means. As long as it could help Yixian would do it. Time passed quickly. At first, they thought that the evolution wouldn't last long. However, that wasn't the case. 7 days had passed, but the light still hadn't disappeared. Even if he wanted to block the 9 pillars of light that seemed to reach the heavens, there was nothing he could do. So finally, a new divine beast rushed over. After all, under that powerful light, anyone would think that a rare treasure had appeared. Naturally, those who saw the light wouldn't let go of the chance to seize the rare treasure. Haha, I want to see what kind of treasure has appeared and caused such a big commotion. At that moment, another elite arrived. His voice was like thunder from afar. It's the old man of the Divine Valley. Didn't he go on a trip? Why is he back so soon? Some people whispered. It was obvious that the old man of the Divine Valley was quite famous. After a while, Yixian saw an old man with the face of an old man, 4 arms, and 6 legs covered in fish scales walk out. Every step the old man took shook the ground like an earthquake. As he walked, the elites of the divine crocodile tribe opened up a path for him. Obviously, even the elites of the divine crocodile tribe didn't dare to block the old man of the Divine Valley's path. What is that thing? Why is it so powerful? It's mine, it's all mine. Haha, it's all mine. Another voice sounded. Along with this voice, an exquisite sedan chair carried by 4 beautiful women of the 9th-level Divine Emperor realm flew over. Time, the divine crocodile tribes. A rare treasure has appeared. It seems like there will be another bloody storm. How lamentable. A bald man with 6 strange snake tails suddenly appeared. His words seemed to be filled with sadness, but no one knew why he was sad. The divine crocodile clan, who was originally the host, was forced to settle down in a corner because the divine crocodile clan was very clear that these experts were not to be trifled with. Some people gathered together and looked around with flickering eyes, waiting silently. Someone arrogantly looked around as if he wanted to start a fight. There were also some people who just quietly searched for a spot, not bothering to ask. More and more experts joined in. On the other hand, Yixian did not know whether to laugh or cry because he suddenly realized that he had become the target of these people. In the past, Yixian often participated in treasure hunting and snatching. However, it was a novel experience to become a treasure and a target for others to fight over. Of course, as the number of powerhouses increased, Yixian felt a little more at ease. After all, generally speaking, as long as one was seizing a treasure, then a bloody battle was unavoidable. Moreover, if one of the seizing parties did not decide the victor, then no one could even think of seizing the treasure. Now, countless experts had gathered, and every one of them was eyeing Yixian covetously. Naturally, Yixian was safe. Because no matter who made the first move against Yixian, there was no doubt that they would immediately be surrounded by others. Therefore, Yixian had the opportunity to fish in troubled waters. Of course, this did not mean that Yixian was safe. In the current situation, Yixian had just obtained an opportunity. Whether he could grasp it and successfully leave was still unknown. The light lasted for a total of 13 days. During these 13 days, the powerful light completely surrounded Yixian and the Godslayer, protecting them from the attacks of the surrounding divine beasts. And 13 days was enough time for countless experts to arrive. At this time, there were hundreds of experts gathered outside Yixian, and of course, there were tens of thousands of others. The outer periphery was now divided into 3 layers. The first layer was where the hundreds of experts each occupied a spot. No one made a move. Of course, there were also people who knew each other and formed groups. Then, there were clans like the Divine Crocodile Tribe. Because they were clans, they had a large number of people and extraordinary strength. As for the outermost layer, there were divine beasts who came alone but were not strong enough. These divine beasts knew that they were not qualified to participate in the treasure hunt, but they were unwilling to leave so easily. Therefore, they gathered around and silently watched the situation change. It seemed that they were also trying to fish in troubled waters. The light disappeared, but the Godslayer's evolution did not end immediately. The Godslayer hung high above Yixian's head, and waves of powerful energy were continuously released. The outer layer of the barrier became stronger and stronger, and it was no longer just a strong defense. Some divine beasts saw that the light had retreated and thought that they had a chance. They rushed forward, but they did not expect that not only would they not be able to break through the barrier, but they would also be rebounded by the barrier. As a result, they were severely injured and had to flee in panic. No one knew why the barrier was so strong, but everyone knew that unless the barrier dissipated on its own, it would be impossible to break through. Originally, Yixian thought that the evolution of the Godslayer had nothing to do with his soldiers. But this time he was wrong. Wei Zhentian still could not enter the Godslayer, but the Godslayer hung high above Yixian's head. Waves of mysterious energy were continuously channeled into Yixian's body. This energy was extremely destructive, and Yixian could not resist at all. Sword body purification. It was actually sword body purification. Those who knew their stuff were shocked, and their faces were filled with envy. Sword body purification referred to the strange phenomenon of a spiritual divine sword feeding back to its master. When a spiritual divine sword gathered enough power and developed strong feelings for its master, it would use its own power to purify its master's body. This kind of purification was extremely rare. Not only did it have high requirements for the divine sword's quality, but it also required an extremely strong power to support it. In addition, the divine sword itself had to have strong feelings for its master. The last point was the most difficult thing. This was the divine sword itself, not the weapon spirit of the divine sword. In fact, to be able to reach this stage, it meant that the divine sword already had a preliminary spiritual intelligence. Chapter 2448. The treasure snatching begins as the saying goes, 10,000 spiritual swords will be enlightened. 10,000 will be enlightened. 10,000 will be enlightened. 10,000 years will be enlightened. This sentence showed how rare it was for a divine sword to be enlightened. Of course, it was also because of this that trying to disrupt the divine sword at this time was tantamount to courting death. Legend had it that there was once a super strong martial artist who tried to stop the divine sword from being enlightened. In the end, he succeeded because he was very powerful and surpassed that person by a few realms. Unfortunately, he was also killed by the divine sword. When the sword body was being purified, it was usually because the divine sword had been greatly strengthened and was able to unleash an extremely powerful force. No one knew how powerful the divine sword was during the sword body purification process. After all, those who tried to find out would only end up dead. Now they could actually see the first cleansing of the divine sword. It was impossible for them not to be surprised. Of course, it was also because of this that the divine beasts were even more certain that they had to seize the god-slaying sword. After all, the cleansing of the divine sword would end sooner or later. Once it ended, the divine sword would return to its original state. At that time, the divine beasts would naturally be able to seize it. Although they had never heard of a divine sword being able to undergo a second cleansing, the fact that it was able to do so proved that the divine sword contained an extremely powerful foundation. Furthermore, everyone naturally saw that the 9 rays of mysterious light were injected into the god-slaying sword. Hence, they naturally knew that the god-slaying sword was tempering itself at the same time as the sword was being cleansed. At this time, Yixian could clearly feel the changes in his body. It could be said that every cell in his body was undergoing an extremely intense change. Rays of sword essence continuously flowed into Yixian's body, and these sword essences actually directly merged with Yixian's body. This power was only 1/10 of the original power. Of the remaining 90% of the power, 60% flowed into Yixian's divine pavilion, while the remaining 30% flowed into the depths of Yixian's soul and consciousness. Mysterious transformations were constantly taking place. The most direct and intense change was Yixian's divinity. The divinity did not have a fixed shape. Everyone's divinity was different. Furthermore, most divinities were a mass of mysterious power that could change at any time. However, Yixian's divinity actually condensed and transformed into the shape of a sword. Sword-shaped divinity. Although Yixian did not know the use of this change, he knew that it was definitely beneficial for him. The most obvious change was in the godhead, But the most intense change was in the divine will. At this moment, Yi Xian's spiritual will had actually given birth to a new divine ability, the divine will sword. This sword of divine will was no longer just a sword light condensed from divine will to kill the enemy. It was a true divine ability. Sword of divine will. Has a certain chance of killing the enemy in one hit. Has a large chance of punishing the enemy with a 10,000 times critical hit. Of the divine sword of the divinity. Divine sword of the divine sword of the divine sword. Divine sword of the divine sword. Divine sword of the divine sword of the sword. The sword of divine will's variant ability. The sword of divine will confuse with the power of the 6 runes mantra to strengthen the attack. There was such an ability? Yi Xian was slightly delighted. The 6 true words could be combined with his divine sense. Adding the special ability of the divine sense sword to permanently lock onto his attacks, it was a very good combination. Normally, Yi Xian would be overjoyed. But now, Yi Xian was not happy. After all, Yi Xian did not even know if he could leave. The sword baptism continued for a while. But what was to come would come. At this time, the sword baptism was over. Naturally, the battle began. Boom! There was a loud sound. The first to attack was Old Man Kamitani. At this time, he suddenly transformed into a ray of light and charged towards Yi Xian. The greed in his eyes was unmistakable. The divine wood sword servants did not need Yi Xian's orders. They hurriedly stood guard beside Yi Xian, waiting for Old Man Kamitani to attack. However, it was clear that Old Man Kamitani would not be so simple to attack Yi Xian. Old Man Kamitani, are you trying to monopolize the treasure? With a shout, another powerhouse attacked. However, this time, he did not attack Yi Xian. Instead, he attacked Old Man Kamitani. Bam! The two of them quickly exchanged a blow in the air. Then they separated. Blazing Sky God Rock, what are you trying to do? Humph? What am I trying to do? Shouldn't I be asking you that question? That's right, Kamitani. You're being a bit unkind. Why do you want to monopolize the treasure? Actually, everyone knew that this chaotic battle was unavoidable. They just didn't want to be the first to attack. Old Man Kamitani's sudden attack was against everyone's interests. It was only natural that others would try to stop him. However, Old Man Kamitani did not say anything. He directly charged towards Blazing Sky God Rock. The two of them quickly engaged in battle. At this moment, there were already people fighting, but the others weren't idle at all. Don't think that they'll just sit there and watch the show. Yi Xian's strength was weak. It could be said that in the eyes of these experts, anyone could kill him. And such a precious treasure was something that everyone wanted. Thus, it was inevitable that some people would take the risk. However, no matter who made a move, they were immediately stopped by others. Yi Xian had been watching coldly from the sidelines, so he could see the situation clearly. The Old Man of the Divine Valley and the Blazing Sky Divine Rock were simply putting on a show. Although the two of them were fighting, they didn't intend to kill anyone. In other words, the two of them had been preparing to mess up the situation from the very beginning. At this time, battles were breaking out everywhere. The powerhouses were all looking for their opponents. However, there were several people who were not actually attacking. Yi Xian could not understand the current situation. After all, if Yi Xian was searching for the treasure by himself, or if he was in human territory, such a chaotic situation would not occur. However, this was the demon god's realm. Thus, it was normal that some things were not within Yi Xian's expectations. Of course, Yi Xian did not have it easy either. There was no chance for him to escape. The god-slaying sword had already returned to Yi Xian's side. Under Wei Zhentian's control, it circled around Yi Xian. The divine wood sword servants also guarded Yi Xian vigilantly. However, this did not give Yi Xian a sense of security. After all, other than the powerhouses, there were also many people who wanted to seize the treasure. In the hearts of these people, once they obtained the god-slaying sword and successfully left, their strength would undoubtedly increase greatly. Even if they did not use it themselves, they could still obtain a huge amount of cultivation resources once they traded it away. Chapter 2449. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. A way to survive. Although Yi Xian was on high alert, he did not pay too much attention to it. Subconsciously, he did not think that there would be an enemy attack.
However, in that instant, a faint and almost imperceptible movement suddenly erupted. Fortunately, Yi Xian's divine consciousness had been strengthened once again. In addition, the location of the explosion happened not far from Yi Xian, so he was able to react in time. However, even so, Yi Xian was only able to slightly shift the position he was standing in. Boom! There was a loud noise. At that moment, Yi Xian realized that what had attacked him was a ray of red light. It was as thin as a gossamer thread, but its power was unparalleled. The divine wood sword servants immediately stood in front of Yi Xian and blocked most of the damage for Yi Xian. However, even so, Yi Xian was still sent flying by the powerful force. The violent force instantly sent Yi Xian flying high into the sky. However, there was someone waiting for Yi Xian in the sky. It was a person with a pair of wings. To be precise, he was a divine beast. However, Yi Xian did not know what race he was from. When Yi Xian was sent flying high into the sky, the person released a large net from his hands in an attempt to trap Yi Xian. The power of the engulfing precept. Yi Xian was shocked. He already knew the purpose of this person. This person was probably the one who had released the red light. Sending Yi Xian flying high into the sky was also part of his plan. His purpose was to capture Yi Xian as quickly as possible. Ding! Target set. Superior Level 6 Divine Emperor. Another Superior Level Divine Emperor. Although at this moment in this area, a rank 6 Superior Divine Emperor was actually not that strong for Yi Xian, he was still a great enemy. It could be said that if they really fought, Yi Xian's troops would not have much of a chance of winning. Unfortunately, this guy was using the power of the Law of Devour, so he couldn't blame Yi Xian for breaking through his web of laws. Not to mention a mere high-grade celestial emperor like him. Even a hierarch or a celestial the arch wouldn't necessarily be able to outplay Yi Xian with the Law of Devouring. After all, Yi Xian's greatest trump card was the power of devouring. At this time, that person vowed solemnly, thinking that victory was already in his grasp. He even had a smile on his face as he waited for Yi Xian to fall into his net of laws. However, Yi Xian did fall into the trap, but it was not the result that the person had imagined. The glowing net of laws had already surrounded Yi Xian. Unfortunately, it did not heed that person's summons and returned to his side. At this moment, that person finally noticed the abnormality and frowned slightly. He wanted to retreat, but he couldn't bear to do so. After all, he knew that if he didn't leave now, he would attract the attention of others. When that time came, he wouldn't be able to escape even if he wanted to. However, seeing that Yi Xian had already fallen into his net of laws, he naturally couldn't bear to leave so easily. What he didn't know was that although Yi Xian was currently trapped in the net of laws of devouring, he wasn't affected at all. Instead, the net of laws of devouring was completely under Yi Xian's control. How dare you! That person only hesitated for a moment, but some experts had already noticed the change here. With a roar, 5 people immediately attacked at the same time. Another boom rang out. A moment ago, that person had been complacent, thinking that he had successfully trapped Yi Xian and had a chance to escape. The next moment, he was killed by the 5 experts and turned into a bloody mist. He couldn't be more dead. As soon as that person died, Yi Xian controlled the net of laws to fall to the ground. On the surface, it seemed that the net of laws had fallen because it was no longer under the control of its master. However, no one knew that this was all secretly controlled by Yi Xian. The 5 experts glanced at Yi Xian trapped in the net of laws. Unexpectedly, no one made a move to snatch it. Instead, they silently retreated and continued their battle. In Yi Xian's heart, these divine beasts' actions were simply too stupid. Of course, if these divine beasts hadn't been so stupid, Yi Xian wouldn't have had a chance to survive. At this moment, with Yi Xian as the center, there were battles everywhere. Divine beasts were constantly falling. It was as if these divine beasts' goal wasn't to snatch the rare treasure, but purely to fight. The net of laws was slowly losing its power. It wouldn't be long before it completely disappeared. However, Yi Xian didn't care at all. Yi Xian silently looked at his surroundings, but he had an idea in his mind. These divine beasts were madly killing each other. For Yi Xian, this was an opportunity to increase his strength. No matter what, if he could increase his strength, then he would have a better chance of escaping. Therefore, under the circumstances that none of the divine beasts noticed, the corpses of divine beasts were constantly disappearing from the battlefield. Some of them were whole corpses, while others were only missing an arm or a leg. Of course, the destination of these corpses was obvious. They were naturally devoured by Yi Xian. Ding! Host has made a breakthrough. Host is now a level 4 medium divine emperor. Ding! Host has made a breakthrough. Host is now a level 5 medium divine emperor. As Yi Xian continued to devour the corpses of divine beasts, his realm also continued to increase. In the beginning, Yi Xian's actions were very careful. After all, he was worried that he would be discovered and attract unnecessary trouble. However, even if someone discovered Yi Xian's actions, they didn't care at all. Therefore, Yi Xian became bolder. Of course, even so, there was a limit to the number of corpses that Yi Xian could devour. After all, Yi Xian was trapped in one place. It was impossible for him to go around and collect the corpses. Therefore, he could only collect the corpses that were nearby. Fortunately, although the corpses nearby were incomplete, they still belonged to the experts. Therefore, Yi Xian obtained great benefits from collecting these corpses. In a short time, Yi Xian was able to break through to the level 1 upper divine emperor realm just by devouring the corpses. However, this kind of collection couldn't continue, because Yi Xian knew in his heart that although these divine beasts were currently in a chaotic battle and no one paid attention to him, as the battle progressed, the divine beasts that remained here would naturally be the strongest. Yi Xian already had an idea. At this time, Yi Xian could only ask the God Blossom Sword servants to make some sacrifices. The moment the primal chaos law net disappeared, so did Yi Xian. This was because Yi Xian had already hidden himself in the devouring space. However, the God Blossom Sword servants were left behind. To be more precise, the God Blossom Sword servants were the first to escape. Moreover, they were escaping in the direction of one of the experts. Under Yi Xian's instructions, the God Blossom Sword servants carried a divine weapon that looked like the God Slayer. Although they deliberately hid it, they deliberately released a trace of its aura. The God Blossom Sword servants approached the expert and handed the divine weapon to him without hesitation. Why would the expert think so much? He took the divine weapon. After all, this divine weapon looked similar to the God Slayer. This was a high-quality imitation that Yi Xian had spent a large amount of faith points to purchase from the system store. Chapter 2450. Caught in an ambush, whether it was appearance or aura, it was almost identical to the God-slaying sword. At least, without careful observation, it was hard to tell the difference. After doing all this, the divine blossom swordsman committed suicide. The expert did not react at all. At this moment, he did not even know what had happened. He held the fake god-slaying sword in his hand and stared at the divine blossom swordsman in shock. Ambitionist! You dare attack! Suddenly, a voice rang out beside the expert. It turned out that someone had also noticed the change here. When he saw that Yi Xian's figure had disappeared from the web of laws, coupled with the fact that the expert was holding the fake god-slaying sword, he naturally misunderstood. Hence, at this moment, someone charged towards the expert without hesitation. What are you doing? The person asked curiously. Unfortunately, no one paid him any attention. Boom! With a punch, the expert named Ambitionist was sent flying before he could understand what had happened. And the fake god-slaying sword in his hand had already changed hands. Quick, the rare treasure is over there. Following this sentence, the expert who had just obtained the fake god-slaying sword did not even have time to look at the god-slaying sword before he was surrounded and attacked. A chaos erupted. This time, it was even bloodier and more brutal. If the divine beasts had only used 30% of their strength in the previous battle, then this time, they had used 120% of their strength. The slaughter had begun. The bloody and brutal slaughter had dyed the entire sky red in an instant. Yi Xian could see the changes in the outside world from within the devouring space. More accurately speaking, Yi Xian had not completely entered the devouring space. After all, the difference in speed between the devouring space and the outside world was too great. Yi Xian had not completely entered the devouring space. Hence, the position where Yi Xian was standing was actually the intersection between the entrance and exit of the devouring space. Here, Yi Xian was able to completely conceal his aura, but he was also able to maintain the same speed as the outside world. Therefore, this position was an extremely good choice. Yi Xian silently watched the slaughter outside. Although this slaughter was actually caused by him, Yi Xian did not feel the slightest bit of pity. Even if these experts from the demon god's domain were all dead, Yi Xian would not bat an eyelid.
These guys deserve to die. The heavens falling and the earth cracking was not enough to describe the current situation. At this moment, the sky and the ground were filled with the aura of slaughter. Especially around the fake god-slaying sword, it was even scarier. One expert after another died on the spot. The sky was already broken, and the ground. Countless experts turned this area into 40,000 pieces of land. Meanwhile, the fake god-slaying sword was being passed around in the hands of one elite after another. However, it was a pity that any super expert who obtained it would be killed in an instant. However, when one person died, another would immediately take over. As long as there was life, the battle would never end. These people had already gone completely mad. They had completely turned into lunatics. Yi Xian watched in horror. Because, only now did he know that there were countless divine beasts hiding in the dark. These divine beasts were initially hiding in the dark and did not participate in the battle. But when the fake god-slaying sword appeared, they appeared. And it seemed that the number of people hiding was not just a few. Clearly, there were experts dying at every moment, but there were still countless experts who continued to advance. At this moment, life seemed to be worthless. Of course, all this had nothing to do with Yi Xian. Yi Xian was just waiting for the center of the battle to leave this place. Every divine beast expert who obtained the fake god-slaying sword left immediately. There was no time to investigate the authenticity of the fake. Even if someone discovered that there was something wrong with the fake god-slaying sword, no one would listen to his explanation. Hence, the center of the battle was constantly moving away. Day after day. Usually, it would only take an hour to cover the distance. But now it took a full 3 days. This distance might not be too far, but Yi Xian could not wait any longer. After all, it was inevitable that some experts would become suspicious. Once they turned back to search, Yi Xian might be trapped here. On the shattered earth, anyone could see that an incomparably fierce battle had once broken out here. Saying that not a single blade of grass grew was not enough to describe the decline of this place. It could even be said that there was not a single rock left. Suddenly, in the soil, a small mound suddenly moved, and a figure drilled out. The moment that figure appeared, he fled into the distance without hesitation. Not even the slightest bit of hesitation. This person was Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian did not dare to stop at all. He was running at full speed. Furthermore, he was even prepared to be transported into that mysterious training space at any time. That training space required a high level of strength, so Yi Xian knew very well that it was useless for him to enter now. There were only a few chances to be transported, so Yi Xian did not want to waste them. However, if there were really experts chasing after him, then perhaps Yi Xian would not have a choice. Yi Xian was extremely fast. At the beginning, there was indeed nothing unusual. But when Yi Xian had fled less than 3 million kilometers away, he realized that he had been locked on by several divine consciousnesses at the same time. Yi Xian frowned. It seemed that there were some intelligent divine beasts who had suspected the location of the net of laws. That was why there was such a scene. It was obvious that these people were after Yi Xian. However, the only thing that made Yi Xian feel relieved was that since these people only dared to reveal themselves now, it meant that they were not super experts. Of course, Yi Xian did not know what their cultivation levels were. Yi Xian escaped at an extremely fast speed because he knew very well that even if the enemies who had locked onto him were not too strong, he would not have a good ending once he was entangled. Unfortunately, the enemies would not allow Yi Xian to continue escaping like this. Boom! Walala! There was a loud noise, and at the same time, a wall of water suddenly appeared around Yi Xian. To be precise, it was a water ball that completely surrounded Yi Xian. Water Rule Boundary Domain. This was actually a special water rule boundary domain. Furthermore, this was not a boundary domain set up by one person, but a boundary domain set up by many people. System, what is this boundary domain? Yi Xian asked in confusion. This boundary domain did not seem to be too strong, at least on the surface. The light blue sea surrounded this area. At the same time, it made the air in the center of the area feel unusually humid. However, the power was very gentle, and no one felt threatened at all. Chapter 2451. Chapter 2451. Chapter 2451. A strange domain. Since someone had set up such a domain, it probably wasn't that simple. Therefore, at this moment,
Yi Xian had no choice but to stop and wait for the changes in the domain. Time passed slowly, but there was no change in the domain. However, one after another, half-human, half-fish demonic beasts appeared. These demon beasts were either holding tridents, broadswords, or longbows in their hands. However, their strength was generally very weak. Apart from their large numbers, there was almost nothing to be proud of. At this moment, Yi Xian was frowning slightly. Could it be that the Murlocs were the ones who set up the domain to try and capture him? If that was the case, then wouldn't he be underestimating Yi Xian? Yi Xian did not use the god-slaying sword. Instead, he took out his rule divine bow and shot it without hesitation. A berserk power erupted in the blink of an eye. A single arrow was enough to kill several thousand of these fishmen. Could it be that these fishmen were truly this unbearable, truly this useless? Yi Xian was extremely puzzled. However, just as Yi Xian was about to kill his way out, a strange change occurred. The fishmen that had been blasted to bits by Yi Xian were quickly resurrecting. What was even more terrifying was that even the enemies at the center of Yi Xian's attack that had been blasted into bloody mist by Yi Xian were resurrecting as well. Moreover, the strength of these resurrected fishmen had actually increased. What was going on? Yi Xian had never seen such a strange thing before. Yi Xian frowned and launched another attack at the group of fishmen. A terrifying attack once again landed on the newly revived fishmen. Just like last time, this group of fishmen were killed without any suspense. However, in the blink of an eye, the fishmen quickly revived. This time, Yi Xian saw it very clearly. These fishmen really did get a boost in strength after reviving. When had Yi Xian ever seen such a terrifying scene? He could actually revive after dying? Resurrection could also increase one's strength. I don't believe that. I want to see if you can revive indefinitely. With a thought from Yi Xian, the Law Divine technique was activated once again, and another attack was launched. Yi Xian attacked and the fishmen revived. Yi Xian attacked again, and the Murlocs revived again. After repeating this several dozen times, Yi Xian finally gave up. These fishmen were actually able to revive indefinitely. Moreover, their strength could increase. However, there was a limit to how much their strength could increase. They could only reach the highest level of low-level first-grade Divine Lord. A mere low-level first-rank Divine Lord realm did not pose the slightest threat to Yi Xian at all. But who knew whether or not these fishmen still had any other special means? In other words, were there any other strange changes in this domain? Yi Xian did not dare delay any longer. This time, he directly released Might Shocker. The 200 god-slaying swords opened up a path. Yi Xian directly cut a bloody path to the edge of the domain. However, when Yi Xian arrived at the edge of the domain, he realized that this water barrier domain, which didn't seem to be anything special, wasn't something that could be broken just because he wanted to. First of all, this was not ordinary water, but a type of heavy water. Mysterious heavy water that was as heavy as ore. Moreover, this heavy water was extremely difficult to break. Even if Yi Xian used his divine power to forcefully disperse it, it would still be very difficult to break through. At this point, how could Yi Xian not understand that to break through this domain, one could not break through it with brute force? One could only find the person who created this domain and kill them, or find the array's foundation. Unfortunately, this was an array set up by several people working together. It was already very difficult to find one person, let alone all of them. Yi Xian had been trapped here for so long, but he had not discovered anything. Therefore, Yi Xian only had one choice, and that was to find the array's core. However, it would not be that easy to find it. System. Do you have any ideas? Yi Xian knew that even the system could not do anything about it. As expected, the system's notification sounded. Ding! System notification. Host, please take note. The host does not have enough resources to break through this domain directly. Yi Xian did not have a single eternal point, and he had consumed a lot of faith points. As for resources, he did not have much left. Therefore, it was normal for the system to give such a notification. It seemed that this time, Yi Xian could only exchange for some useful items in the system, and then think of a way to break through this domain himself. Who's playing tricks? Do you dare to step forward? Yi Xian shouted loudly. Yi Xian knew very well that the person in the dark would not answer at all. As expected, other than the screams of the Murlocs, the entire domain was silent. Yi Xian quickly scanned the surroundings with his divine telekinesis, but he could not find anything strange. At this time, Yi Xian was frowning. Today, Yi Xian had encountered an unprecedented crisis. He did not expect that after escaping from the encirclement of those experts, he would fall into such a crisis again. The most fundamental reason was that Yi Xian was not strong enough. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Yi Xian's cultivation level of superior first-grade divine emperor was already terrifying, but for Yi Xian, it was still not enough. In front of those super experts, Yi Xian did not even have the ability to resist a mere superior first-grade divine emperor. Of course, the people besieging Yi Xian might not be as strong as Yi Xian. After all, if they were strong enough, they would not have dared to show themselves. However, this also showed that Yi Xian was not strong enough. If Yi Xian was a bit stronger, then he might not have been trapped by this domain. Yi Xian looked at the murlocs in front of him, one after another, but did not kill any of them. In any case, these murlocs could not threaten Yi Xian at all. Yi Xian wanted to see what other tricks the enemy in the dark had up his sleeve. Yi Xian did not believe that these people were really counting on these murlocs to kill him. Sure enough, when Yi Xian stopped killing the murlocs, the domain changed. Once again, there was a strange change in the domain. Groups of murlocs kept gathering and devouring each other. Moreover, the strangest thing was that these murlocs actually increased their cultivation level after devouring each other. Groups of murlocs gathered together but quietly lined up, waiting for the murlocs at the front to devour them. As the murlocs continued to devour, the murlocs' cultivation level also increased. At first, it was just an inferior first-grade divine emperor, but after devouring, it increased to a superior first-grade divine emperor. The strangest thing was that all the murlocs stopped devouring each other once they reached the superior first-grade divine emperor realm. Even so, there were still 1,000 superior first-grade divine emperor murlocs in front of Yi Xian. Most importantly, Yi Xian could not kill them yet. Chapter 2452. Strange murlocs. Even though they were all rank 1 divine emperors, these murlocs could already cause damage to Yi Xian. Even if Yi Xian released his divine wood sword servants, what use would they be if they could only defend and not attack? If this continued, Yi Xian was destined to fall. Unless Yi Xian chose to teleport into that special training space, or hide in the devouring space. Pure defensive divine talismans were constantly being created by Yi Xian, transforming into multiple energy shields. Unfortunately, even so, these divine talismans would eventually be broken through. Hence, it was completely useless to wear them down like this. In the sky, on the ground, and even underground, with Yi Xian as the center, rays of protective light constantly flashed. Outside the light were the frenzied murlocs that were constantly attacking. To these murlocs, death was probably the last thing they feared, because once they died, not only could they be revived, but their strength would also increase. Hence, their attacks could be said to be endless and incomparably ferocious. In an instant, Yi Xian was trapped in place. However, Yi Xian was completely unmoved. Apart from occasionally replenishing his defensive divine talismans, Yi Xian did not even spare a glance at the murlocs outside. Instead, he was wholeheartedly searching for a loophole in this domain. Yi Xian was also an array master. Combined with his experience in creating divine talismans, refining artifacts, and other professions, it could be said that Yi Xian's understanding of array formations was not bad. Unfortunately, this time, the enemy had used array formations to set up this domain. Hence, it contained the profound mysteries of array formations, as well as the mysterious power of the domain. Hence, it was not that easy for Yi Xian to break through it. At this moment, Yi Xian was fully focused, releasing his divine telekinesis and continuously searching. Even the smallest corner was not missed by Yi Xian. Over and over again, Yi Xian's divine telekinesis quickly searched the entire domain. This domain was exquisite, but the person who set it up had underestimated Yi Xian, because Yi Xian's mastery of array formations was extraordinary. The array domain had its own advantages. However, in front of Yi Xian, there were also disadvantages. Yi Xian abruptly raised his head and looked at the center of the entire domain. Over there, waves of powerful energy constantly fluctuated. That was where the energy of the entire domain was the most concentrated. That was also where the defensive power of the entire domain was the strongest. However, it was there that Yi Xian discovered the weakness of the domain. It could be said that this entire domain was very complete. Through the senses of his divine consciousness, Yixian could even detect that even underground, it was still completely enveloped by the power of this domain. The entire domain was circular, and the heavy water constantly flowed, forming the entire domain. It was like a hollow water ball, and Yixian was trapped in the center of the water ball. At this moment, Yixian discovered that the top of the water ball was where the heavy water flowed. For Yixian, that was his only chance to leave. The power of the heavy water was extremely strong, and coupled with the rapid flow of the water, it was impossible for Yixian to force his way out. Only at the joint, due to the collision of the various water forces, would a very small gap occasionally appear. That was Yixian's chance. In Yixian's heart, he was once again certain that the person who set up this array domain was not a strong person. After all, how strong was this array domain? How could there be a gap? Since there was a gap, there was only one explanation. The person who controlled this array domain was not strong enough to make this array domain appear perfectly. Of course. No matter what the reason was, at least one thing was certain, and that was that Yixian's chance had come. With a sudden leap, Yixian did not hesitate and flew directly towards the center. Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaying sword to revolve around Yixian, while the divine wood swordsman followed closely behind Yixian. In the blink of an eye, Yixian had already arrived at the center. However, since Yixian could discover the gap in the center, how could the enemy not know? Therefore, at this moment, countless water tentacles extended from the water walls. The moment those tentacles appeared, they whipped towards Yixian. Some even turned into water swords that filled the sky and rushed towards Yixian. In an instant, the entire sky was completely surrounded by these heavy water weapons. It could be said that they were so densely packed that there was not a single gap. However, there was still a gap between the attacks. At this moment, Yixian's divine telekinesis had already been activated to the maximum. His entire body was dodging rapidly. Of course, while he was dodging, he was also flying upwards. The power of unlimited teleportation was displayed to the extreme in this small area of dodging. It was as if the entire sky was filled with Yixian's figures. And as Yixian flew upwards, the density of the attacks became tighter. Clearly, the enemy was getting a little anxious. But even so, there was nothing they could do to Yixian. Dodge, advance. Dodge again, advance again. Yixian advanced courageously. No matter what was in front of him, Yixian would not stop. Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaying sword to its maximum speed. The extreme speed allowed the god-slaying sword to have the power to pierce through the heavy water. At the same time, it was able to help Yixian block some of the water pillars that he could not dodge in time. Break for me! Suddenly, Yixian let out a loud roar as his entire body charged towards the center. Without a sound, Yixian directly charged out of the water ball. When Yixian hovered outside the water ball, he saw the people who had set up this formation in an attempt to trap him. 9 strange murlocs. Compared to the murlocs in the formation, these 9 murlocs were even uglier and stranger. Apart from a pair of legs, the rest of their bodies were fish? Or did they not transform? Clearly that was not the case. Since they were able to work together to set up such a formation, they clearly had the power to transform. Therefore, the only explanation was that they looked down on the human form. Almost all divine beasts that cultivated were clear on one thing. That was, the human form would greatly enhance one's comprehension and usage of the laws. Perhaps the divine beast's original form would be enhanced in various aspects such as physique and strength, but if they wanted to quickly comprehend the laws and maximize the power of the laws, they would still need to transform into human form. It was impossible that these 9 murlocs did not know this. But why did they not choose to transform into human form? Even if no one told Yixian knew very well that if these 9 murlocs transformed into human form and set up this formation, it would not be easy for Yixian to escape. Therefore, Yixian suddenly became interested in the strange 9-headed fish. System, detect these 9 monsters for me. I want to see what is so special about them. Chapter 2453. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation continue escaping following Yixian's command. The system prompt quickly sounded. Ding! System prompt. The detection of Yixian requires 150,000 faith points. Does the host accept? 150,000 faith points? Yixian was slightly taken aback, not because of the amount of faith points, but because of the system prompt. It seemed that every time Yi Xian wanted to detect something, he would need faith points. Yi Xian did not notice when it started, but now that he suddenly noticed, he realized that every time he used the system to detect something, it would more or less consume some faith points. Faith points could be said to be the easiest thing for Yi Xian to obtain. Compared to eternal points, devour points, and so on, faith points would only increase at any time, and by a significant amount. Moreover, as long as Yi Xian was willing, after controlling a new territory, the rate of faith points increasing would be even faster. Therefore, Yi Xian had never paid much attention to faith points. He even thought that the faith point system was specially set up to be used to exchange for other points, such as eternal points and devour points. But now, it seemed that this was not the case at all. It seemed that faith points had many uses, and the consumption was also very high. With doubts, Yi Xian agreed to the detection this time. Ding! System prompt. The target is the resentful Divine Fish Clan, one of the subordinate clans of the ancient Divine Fish Clan. They have a strong grudge against the human race. Once they encounter a human, they will definitely fight to the death. Ding! The resentful Divine Fish Clan is a special rare clan. Optional random mission detected. Collector of rare clans. Random mission. Collector of rare clans. Mission requirements. Find a suitable space, collect various rare clans scattered in the celestial realm, and tame them. Mission is optional. There is no punishment for failure. Collect a certain number of rare clans to open a special treasure chest. Collecting mission? And there was no punishment. Yi Xian would definitely do it. After all, for others, this special space was not easy to find, but Yi Xian had a devour space with him. It was not a problem at all for him to divide the space into different areas. Of course, since this quest was a race-gathering quest, a rare race would require Yi Xian to collect at least 2 divine beasts, 1 male and 1 female. Yi Xian did not hesitate and immediately accepted the mission. These 9 strange fish were actually not that strong. Once Yi Xian broke through their array formation domain, it could be said that they were no longer a threat. In addition, Yi Xian had heard the system notification and knew that this strange fish would attack as soon as it saw a human, so he was not too worried about being hunted down by the treasure hunting team. Therefore, Yi Xian asked the system again, "System, why do I need to consume faith points when I use detect now?" This was a problem that Yi Xian had to figure out. Otherwise, no matter how many conviction points he had, Yi Xian would not be able to afford to squander them like this. Ding! System notification. Please take note. Host. As the host's cultivation level increases, the detection target strength will increase accordingly. Therefore, the system needs conviction points to strengthen the detection. So that was the case. Yi Xian nodded. Yi Xian understood the system's explanation in his heart. It seemed that no matter how many conviction points he had, if Yi Xian did not use them sparingly, they would not be enough. When he retracted his gaze back to the strange fish, he realized that the 9 strange fish had actually started to flee quickly. However, it wanted to escape immediately after ambushing Yi Xian. How could it be that easy? Wei Zhantian, go! At Yi Xian's command, the 2 God-Slayer swords immediately flew out. Of course, this time, the God-Slayer sword's goal was not to kill these strange fish, but to trap them. Wei Zhantian controlled the God-Slayer swords and moved extremely quickly. After a while, they arrived beside the strange fish. The 2 God-Slayer swords each emitted a sword light and easily trapped the strange fish. The strange fish were extremely terrified and kept screaming. Obviously, they were scared of Yi Xian. Unfortunately, it was too late for them to be afraid now. When they had first tried to kill Yi Xian, they should have expected such an outcome. Within the devouring space, Yi Xian had once again opened up a special area. Yi Xian had set up layers of restrictions and even seals here. After that, Yi Xian did not even ask for the strange fish's opinion and directly absorbed the 9 strange fish into the devouring space. The pitiful 9 strange fish had failed to ambush Yi Xian and had instead become Yi Xian's prisoners. What awaited them after that was endless domestication. After all, Yi Xian would only be considered to have completed his mission after he had completely tamed them. Yi Xian did not care too much about the rewards of collecting rare species. Just the joy of collecting them was enough for Yi Xian to do this. When the strange fish disappeared, the array domain and the murlocs within it disappeared as well. Obviously, they had all been summoned by the 9 strange fish. Yi Xian did not dare to stay here any longer. After all, No one knew whether or not an enemy would come to kill him. After all, Yi Xian would not think that every divine beast elite was that retarded. Yi Xian's movements were extremely fast. Unfortunately, his doubts finally came to an end. First, a divine consciousness suddenly swept past Yi Xian. Yi Xian had just reacted when that divine consciousness had already locked onto him. Damn it! I've been discovered. Yi Xian was shocked. Since the divine consciousness had already discovered him, it would not be long before that divine beast elite caught up with him. Yi Xian used his greatest speed to escape. Unfortunately, that divine consciousness was still locked onto Yi Xian. System, refine restrictions and divine talismans to stop that person behind me. Yi Xian could not care less. After all, Yi Xian's divine consciousness was not undetectable. However, he did not discover anything. This already showed that the person who had locked onto him with divine consciousness was definitely much stronger than Yi Xian. Therefore, the only thing Yi Xian could do was to escape. Running away when he saw the enemy? This was an extremely shameful thing to do. However, if he knew that the enemy was extremely strong and that he had no chance of winning, he would be a fool to try and fight. Therefore, Yi Xian could not care less about his reputation at this moment. Furthermore, the fake god-slaying sword would be exposed sooner or later. Once it was exposed, those enraged divine beast elites would naturally understand that Yi Xian had tricked them. If they chased after him, Yi Xian would not stand a chance. Divine Wood Swordsman, come out. Go, block the pursuers for me. Within the array domain, regardless of whether it was the murlocs or the heavy water attacks, they could not hurt the Divine Wood Swordsman in the slightest. At this moment, Yi Xian could only send the Divine Wood Swordsman out again. Swordsman of 10,000 search. Follow the Divine Wood Swordsman to investigate. Once there is news, report back immediately. Yi Xian released the Swordsman of 10,000 search once again. Although this little guy was extremely weak, it was still useful for detection. Divine talismans fell one after another, turning into restrictions that delayed the enemy. Yi Xian did not dare to stop at all and kept escaping forward. While escaping, Yi Xian could feel that the divine consciousness that had locked onto him fluctuated several times. Yi Xian could guess that perhaps the Divine Wood Swordsman had already fought with him. Chapter 2454. Substantial illusion. It was unknown how far they had gone, but the divine sense that had locked onto Yi Xian had disappeared. Not long after, the sword servant hand leading sword had returned with a divine beast corpse in her hand. This time, Yi Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Only now did Yi Xian realize that he had underestimated his own strength. He had underestimated the strength of the divine wood sword servants. For a long time, the 1,000-beast sword attendants had only been used as support and rarely fought alone. But in reality, the current divine wood sword attendants already had the strength to fight alone. They were even stronger than Yi Xian. For example, this time, Yi Xian only wanted the divine wood sword servants to stop the enemy. It could be said that he never expected the divine wood sword servants to kill the enemy. However, the divine wood sword servants did it. Not only did they complete the mission Yi Xian gave them, they even killed the enemy. Yi Xian looked at the divine beast corpses in the hands of the divine wood swordsman and felt rather helpless. Just as he was about to devour the corpse, he didn't expect that this time, Yi Xian would actually find a universe ring on the divine beast's body. It was not that divine beasts did not know how to use Qiankuan rings, but compared to the Kunlun god domain and the demon god domain, the ratio of divine beasts with Qiankuan rings was much lower. Yi Xian kept the interspatial ring doubtfully. Because the divine beast was already dead, the spiritual force seal on it was not very strong, even though it might have been much stronger than Yi Xian when it was alive. But now, Yi Xian could still easily undo it. There was a pile of miscellaneous materials mixed with some spirit stones. It seemed that this divine beast was not rich. However, just as Yi Xian was about to devour it, he unexpectedly discovered a special item. Ding! System notification. Detected special material, Realm Guardian Illusion Orb. Realm Guardian Illusion Bead? What was this? Yi Xian clicked on the introduction and took a closer look. The Realm Guardian Orb was a teleportation orb used to enter a specific secret realm. Through this orb, one could be teleported to a specific illusory realm. Wait, an illusion? Secret realm? Yi Xian was puzzled and immediately clicked on the fantasy realm data. An illusory realm was a type of secret realm. However, it was not an ordinary secret realm. Instead, it was a realm that was concealed using a special method. It was used to store materials or for other special purposes. Generally speaking, illusions were not very big, but what was inside was arranged according to the wishes of the owner. Speaking of which, they were of a higher level than secret realms. So that was the case. Yi Xian nodded. To put it bluntly, this thing was just a warehouse. However, Yi Xian's devouring space came with him at all times, while the demonic beast's devouring space could only be transported through the illusion pearl. Yi Xian only hesitated for a moment before he made his decision. In any case, he might be hunted down if he stayed outside, so he might as well enter the illusory realm, which would be safer. Thinking of this, Yi Xian no longer hesitated. He swallowed the mythical beast's corpse and crushed the illusion pearl. Similar to using a teleportation talisman, Yi Xian was quickly teleported to the entrance of a secret realm. This was a cave, but it was obviously not as simple as it seemed. As expected, when Yi Xian walked in, he realized that he was walking downhill. However, looking at the cave with the naked eye, even if he used his divine perception, he could only see a flat path. When Yi Xian turned around to look at his feet, he realized that there was a faint glow around his body. Substantial illusory realm. This cave was actually a place sealed by the substantial illusory realm. The explanation for the substantial illusory realm was actually very simple. It meant that the illusion had already materialized, and without a method to unlock it like an illusion bead, the person who entered could only walk the normal path of the cave. They would not discover anything special about this place and would only treat it as a cave. However, with the illusion pearl, the person who entered would be guided by the power of the illusion pearl and break open a new path, then walk underground. Yi Xian no longer had any doubts and continued to walk forward. After walking for an unknown period of time, Yi Xian's eyes finally lit up. At the same time, he heard the dripping sound of water. Even further away, he could hear the noise of some monkeys. Could it be that this was a monkey cave? However, Yi Xian remembered that the divine beast that was killed by the divine wood swordsman was not a monkey. What was going on? Or could it be that the divine beast had only obtained this illusion pearl and this secret realm did not belong to him? Was it equivalent to an invitation card that allowed him to enter? Of course, the divine beast was already dead, so Yi Xian could not confirm anything at all. This secret realm couldn't be considered very big, and the apes within weren't very strong either. Yi Xian's divine sense had only swept through the entire secret realm once, and he'd already seen the entire secret realm. Other than a set of armor in the center and a large sword, there was only one tombstone that attracted Yi Xian's attention. Great wisdom, great strength, the tomb of the divine monkey. This secret realm was actually a tomb? After all this time, Yi Xian had come to the tomb of the monkey ancestor. Ji, who are you? Suddenly, a little monkey jumped in front of Yi Xian and blinked at Yi Xian. The little monkey's eyes were extremely clear and didn't have the slightest bit of enmity towards Yi Xian. Therefore, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't kill him for no reason. Instead, he casually replied, "I'm Yi Xian." Yi Xian, Ji, I have never heard of you. Ji, what are you doing here? Are you here for the ancestor's blessing? Ancestor. Ancestor again. In the demon god realm, the most mysterious thing was probably the power of the ancestor. And the most common one was the ancestor's power. It could be said that the ancestor's power was everywhere. Who would have thought that the ancestor's blessing would be mentioned here? Yi Xian frowned slightly but did not refute. Instead he asked, "How did you know?" Ji, since you are here, why else would you be here if not for the ancestor's blessing? Let's go. I will take you to see grandfather ancestor. Grandfather ancestor? He just didn't know if this so-called grandfather ancestor was talking about his grief or his name. Of course, no matter what it was, Yi Xian did not care. After all, there was nothing in this cave that could threaten Yi Xian. Therefore, Yi Xian followed without hesitation. After a while, Yi Xian was brought to an old monkey by the little monkey. This old monkey was very old and had no cultivation base. Grandfather ancestor, a human is here to seek the ancestor's blessing. A human? You mean a human? Grandfather ancestor looked up at Yi Xian in confusion. After confirming Yi Xian's identity as a human, he asked in confusion, "It's been 1,000,000 years since a human has come here. Little guy, come and tell grandfather ancestor, what's wrong with your human race?"
Why hasn't anyone come here for 1,000,000 years? Could it be that your human race is going to be exterminated? Wiped out. Chapter 2455. Arrest warrant. Why do you say that our human race is about to be exterminated? Yi Xian asked his grandfather with a puzzled expression. Isn't that the case? As long as you meet the requirements, you can enter the ancestral spirit cave and obtain the blessing of my monkey god race's ancestor. It's been over 1,000,000 years since I started managing the cave, but not a single one of you humans has come. Isn't it because your strength is too weak that you were eliminated by the other races? The power of the primogenitor was also open to humans? It was open at least 1,000,000 years ago? These words instantly caused doubt to reappear in Yi Xian's heart. However, from the mouth of the ancestor of the monkey clan, Yi Xian also heard that their clan had always been guarding the secret realm and had never had any contact with the outside world. Therefore, they probably wouldn't know what Yi Xian was going to say. Naturally, there was no need for Yi Xian to seek trouble for himself. Of course not. Our human race is developing very well now. It's just that we haven't obtained the illusion bead yet. Yi Xian's reply made the old monkey look at Yi Xian doubtfully. Then it waved its hand and a screen of light appeared in front of the old monkey. There was clearly some information recorded on it, but unfortunately, Yi Xian could not understand it. That shouldn't be the case. According to the rules set by the ancestor, every year the human clan will be given an illusion pearl. Moreover, the human clan's patriarch has also received one. Why do you say that the human clan has never received an illusion pearl? Yi Xian naturally knew the reason. Simply put, these illusion beads had already fallen into the hands of the other races. This mysterious place had no connection to the outside world, so naturally, whatever the other races said, they would believe. Even if they had doubts, they would not be able to verify them. The current Kunlun god domain no longer had a place for the human tribe. Therefore, it was not surprising that the excess illusory pearls had been stolen by the juniors of the other powerful tribes. Yi Xian felt that this ancestral land of the monkey clan was a place that already existed before the battle of the twilight of the gods. Just like how Yi Xian needed to rebuild his faith, this monkey tribe was also a place of faith. However, their will was for all races to coexist, so they didn't interfere. Every once in a while, they would give out illusions so that the geniuses of the various races could enter and receive blessings from their progenitor. Could it be that in ancient times, in the demon god's domain, the various races actually coexisted in harmony? Then why did it become like this now? Why would the human race become the target of oppression by the other races? Furthermore, it was a suppression that left no way out? For a moment, Yi Xian's heart was filled with doubts. But of course, this wasn't the time to solve it. Therefore, Yi Xian could only keep his doubts in his heart and follow the monkeys forward. The land rented by the monkey tribe was naturally blessed by their progenitor. However, he didn't know what kind of blessing would be given to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was led to stand on a platform. After everything was ready, a few monkeys chanted and directed a ray of light directly onto Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian had already experienced the progenitor's blessing once, so he wasn't afraid at all. This time, the progenitor's blessing didn't last for a long time. Yi Xian only received some agility enhancement. All in all, the progenitor's blessing for the monkey tribe's rented land was very ordinary. Of course, to Yi Xian, the most important thing wasn't what he received from the progenitor's blessing. It was that he saw a possibility in this rented land. A possibility that was almost inevitable in ancient times. The possibility that the human tribe and the other races could coexist peacefully in the demon god's domain and compete on an equal footing. Unfortunately, after countless years, everything had changed. Then when did it start to change? What was the reason for the change? Yi Xian's strength was limited, and his time was even more limited. If he wanted to save the entire human tribe in the demon god's domain, it would be extremely difficult. If he could find the source of the problem and deal with the conflict between the human tribe and the other races, perhaps that would be the best solution. Of course, this matter could only be done step by step. After all, Yi Xian had no clue. After retreating from the monkey tribe's ancestral land, Yi Xian realized that he couldn't find any trace of that place. At this time, Yi Xian was still standing in the cave. However, he couldn't find anything in the monkey tribe's ancestral land. Even if Yi Xian dug into the ground, he wouldn't find anything. Only through the illusion bead could he reach the monkey tribe's ancestral land. At this time, once Yi Xian retreated, there was no other way.
Of course, after retreating from the monkey tribe's ancestral land, Xian was temporarily safe. Because he didn't know where this place was. Why was it temporarily safe? Those super experts fought and killed countless people. Finally, an extremely powerful super expert obtained the god-slaying sword and realized that the god-slaying sword was a fake. In addition, a mythical beast had sensed the battle between Xian and the strange fish. In an instant, he realized that they had been deceived. Xian's appearance was not hidden from the start, so every expert knew what Xian looked like. Therefore, a large number of arrest warrants were issued, and they were all warrants with great rewards. Xian walked forward. He didn't have a goal. Originally, he wanted to find the various holy sons and find out where Luo was after defeating them. However, Xian knew that once those super experts found out about the fake god-slaying sword, they wouldn't let him go. Therefore, he didn't dare to cause trouble easily. Even if he wanted to find the holy sons and ask them, he couldn't do it at this time. During this period, it was best for Xian to keep a low profile. Of course, this was also because Xian didn't know that the arrest warrant had been issued. Otherwise, Xian wouldn't have to hide like this. After 2 days, Xian finally found a city. Mythical beasts rarely built cities. Even if they did, it was definitely not as big as the cities built by humans in the Kunlun god domain. And it could be said that every city had its own uniqueness. For example, the city that Xian was looking at now. This city was built by a tribe called the Great Ant Tribe. The Great Ant Tribe was rather special. They had a clear division of labor like ants, and their internal structure was very strict. However, they were huge and couldn't be called ants at all. It could only be said that they were a special tribe that had learned the structure of ants. Legend had it that the Great Ant Tribe wasn't a tribe from the realm of the gods, but came from a mysterious place. It was just that there was no way to prove this legend. Even the Great Ant Tribe didn't know anything about it. Therefore, this legend could only be said to end here. When Xian walked into this city, he felt a sense of oppression. The Great Ant Tribe looked like humans. They had 2 legs and 4 arms. Their faces were also very similar to humans. However, they didn't have hair on their heads. Instead, they had 2 strange feelers. Of course, their feelers had many uses. As for their bodies, they were divided into 3 parts and covered in scales. In terms of appearance, they looked like ants. This was probably the origin of the Great Ant Tribe's name. Chapter 2456. 7 Bloody Nights. The reason why Xian felt pressured was precisely because this city was too strict. It could be said that in this place, other than outsiders, as long as they were members of the Great Ant clan, every single one of them had a clear division of labor and their own missions. At this time, Xian was walking towards the city gates. There was a row of Great Ant Tribe guards at the gates. These guards were lined up neatly, so much so that every movement was exactly the same. From the sky to the ground, there was a total of 6 rows with 12 guards on each row. However, these guards didn't even have the slightest deviation from the angle of the swords in their hands. The moment Xian walked through the city gates, the restriction on flying was immediately activated, forcing everyone to land on the ground. And the place where they landed was just right in the middle of the barbican. Within the barbican, a row of guards was checking the identity of every person who entered the city. As for what they were checking, Xian didn't know at all. When Xian walked into the city, he saw an even stranger scene. Every single member of the Great Ant Tribe was walking in a neat row. Oppressive. Incomparably oppressive. This city was full of oppressive feeling. There wasn't a single trace of disorder in the entire city. This was the realm of the gods. In the realm of the gods where the strong were respected, strength represented everything. However, this universal rule didn't seem to apply in this place. In this place, all rules didn't apply. Xian had seen it with his own eyes, and it wasn't the first time he'd seen a powerful expert in the Divine King realm line up with some small fry that he could even blow to death with a single breath. Of course, this was the tradition of the Great Ant Tribe after all. It had nothing to do with Xian. In this city, there was a special area for receiving outsiders, and Xian could only go there. Because apart from this area, anyone who accidentally trespassed anywhere else would be politely asked to leave. When Xian walked into this special area, he felt slightly better. Xian didn't have a purpose in coming here. He just happened to be passing by. Therefore, at this moment, Xian casually found a restaurant and walked in. "Sir, please come upstairs." Yi Xian nodded and headed upstairs. The people who opened shops in this area were not from the Great Ant clan. If they were from the Great Ant clan, they would not be shouting like this. After finding a random spot, Yi Xian held the Godslayer in his hand and examined it closely. After all, Yi Xian had not had the time to take a good look at the Godslayer after it had been strengthened. The appearance of the Godslayer had changed a lot, but Yi Xian could still see the original appearance of the Godslayer. At this moment, the Godslayer was flowing with brilliant light and vibrant colors. It could be said that even a blind person could tell that the Godslayer was extraordinary. And it was inevitable that there would be people who would be disloyal. At this moment, a group of people were secretly communicating with each other through voice transmission. However, they were obviously very wary, not only because of Yi Xian's strength, but also because this was the territory of the Great Ant clan. Yi Xian casually ordered some food and prepared to rest here. After all, he was on tenterhooks during the escape and Yi Xian was still a little tired. Therefore, Yi Xian could not help but let his guard down and did not notice those people's movements in time. At this moment, Yi Xian was still sitting in his seat, completely unaware of the approaching danger. A guest in the restaurant hurriedly ran out. Not long after, a voice transmission talisman flew out. After eating and drinking, Yi Xian headed outside. In the city of the Great Ant clan, Yi Xian did not know of any special places to go, so he just strolled around casually. At this moment, a young man ran up to Yi Xian. "Senior, is this your first time in Great Ant City?" Yi Xian glanced at the young man. His strength was very ordinary, so he did not pay much attention to him and only nodded. "Senior, what do you think of this? Where do you want to go? I will take you there. When the time comes, you can just reward me. What do you think?" So that was what this young man meant. There were guides in almost every city, so it was not considered special. Therefore, Yi Xian did not think too much about it and asked directly, "Tell me, is there any place worth visiting here?" "Senior, you have asked the right person. Great Ant City is the territory of the Great Ant clan, and the Great Ant clan is famous for being strict. Therefore, the treasures they make can be said to be the most exquisite. The Jubao Pavilion is the biggest auction venue in Great Ant City. Of course, other than that, the Bloody Seven Nights is also a good place to go. The Bloody Seven Nights is an entertainment venue. As long as you have enough spiritual stones, you can enjoy all the services you want there." The young man began to introduce Yi Xian. This time, Yi Xian was here to relax, so he took a fancy to the Bloody Seven Nights at first glance. Bloody Seven Nights. This name is a little interesting. Tell me, what is so special about it? Yi Xian interrupted the young man and asked casually. "Senior, you may not know, but the name Bloody Seven Nights has a great history. It is said that when the Bloody Seven Nights was first established, the fierce White Giant clan and the sharp-mouthed Silverhook clan fought for the management rights of the Bloody Seven Nights. The battle lasted for 7 days outside Great Ant City. During these 7 days, the blood of the two clans flowed like a river. The fierce White Giant clan who won in the end was famous for being simple-minded. Therefore, they did not even bother to think of a name and directly used the Bloody Seven Nights as the name. Fierce White Giant clan. Yi Xian murmured softly. The guide immediately said, "Senior, you shouldn't provoke the members of the White Fierce Giant clan. They are very simple-minded. You can even say that they are very stupid. However, they are very stubborn. Moreover, they have a very good relationship with the Great Ant clan. Moreover, one of their servant clans is the Thousand-Eyed Wolf Frog clan. They are very cunning. It can be said that they are very difficult to provoke. Therefore, if Senior goes to the Bloody Seven Nights, you must remember not to incur enmity with the fierce White Giant clan. Even if these fellows won't find trouble with you temporarily in the Bloody Seven Nights, once you leave the city, you will definitely be hunted down by the fierce White Giant clan and the Great Ant clan. These fellows are stubborn fellows. Once they recognize you as an enemy, they will not stop until they kill you. Therefore, you must not provoke them. Moreover, these two clans have numerous experts." Yi Xian nodded. For Yi Xian, of course, he would not provoke trouble for no reason. He came here to relax, not to look for trouble. Why would he provoke the fierce White Giant clan for no reason? After making up his mind, Yi Xian did not hesitate and directly let the young man lead the way. Soon, Yi Xian was led to a rather remote pavilion by the young man. This pavilion was very dilapidated, but it was definitely not simple. Chapter 2457. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The puppet maze. Xian nodded and tossed a pile of spiritual stones to the servant before walking in. There were no rules to enter the Bloody Seven Nights. Anyone could enter if they wanted to. However, it was not that easy to enter the real Bloody Seven Nights. There was almost no one in the outer ring of the Bloody Seven Nights. After all, those who could enter the Bloody Seven Nights were here because of the uniqueness of the Bloody Seven Nights. Not long after Xian entered, a servant approached Xian. "Hello, sir. Is this your first time in the Bloody Seven Nights?" The servant looked very strange. He had the head of a wolf, but the body of a bullfrog. His eyes were compound. This should be the thousand-eyed wolf frog tribe, a subsidiary tribe of the fierce white giant tribe. Xian thought to himself, the name of the thousand-eyed wolf frog tribe is very fitting. Compound eyes are like 1,000 eyes. Wolf head and frog body are exactly the same as a wolf frog. Of course, Xian's gaze didn't linger on the thousand-eyed wolf frog servant for too long. Instead, he said, "This is my first time here." "I see. Then, please follow me to get your identity talisman." "Identity talisman? What's that?" Xian asked curiously. "Oh, sir, you might not know, but my Bloody Seven Nights is divided into 7 entertainment areas. Each area has a corresponding identification rune. As for how to handle it, it is very simple. You just need to show your wealth. Sir, you can rest assured that my Bloody Seven Nights reputation is perfect. As long as you are our guest, we will definitely protect your privacy and safety." Although the thousand-eyed wolf frog clan attendant wasn't strong, his tone was neither servile nor overbearing. It was obvious that he would often encounter some experts here. As for Xian's high-level divine emperor realm cultivation, he could only be considered to be above average in this Bloody Seven Nights. Since he was here to relax, Xian naturally did not want to cause trouble. He followed the thousand-eyed wolf frog to the other side. Soon, Xian's identity talisman was processed. Xian only showed 1 million spiritual stones and was granted access to the first and second zones. After all, Xian was just here to relax. He did not intend to entertain for too long. After the identity talisman was processed, Xian was led to a transportation formation. This was the entrance to the Bloody Seven Nights secret realm. However, when when he entered the first zone, he realized how extravagant the Bloody Seven Nights was. Xian was. Xian was Xian. And there were countless pavilions. And pavilions. There were thousands of servants. Pavilions there were House Xian translation, 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 translation. Translation 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 Wang translation 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 of translation 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 underscore translation. Of course, the monthly fee of 100,000 spirit stones was not something an ordinary person could easily accept. Of course, if someone was willing to add on 1 million spiritual stones, the lives of these 1,000 servants could be handed over to the master. These servants were specially nurtured by the Bloody Seven Nights. They were considered one of the subordinate races of the Bloody Seven Nights. Moreover, each of them had taken the face-retaining pill refined by the Bloody Seven Nights. This face-preserving pill didn't just make the servants look more handsome, it was also a method of control. It could be said that the servants of the Bloody Seven Nights had no way of leaving this mystic realm. Once they did, the only thing that awaited them would be their bodies exploding. Of course, as long as one was willing to pay the appropriate price, the Bloody Seven Nights could get any servants of any race. Xian did not care about these servants. After accepting his own palace, Xian headed outside. In the Bloody Seven Nights, all the servants wore the same uniform. Of course, in their own palace, the master could let the servants wear their favorite clothes according to their preferences. Outside, they could only wear the same uniform. The reason for this was to make it easier to distinguish between different identities. In other words, as long as they were not wearing servant clothes, they were definitely guests. Gambling. Without a doubt, gambling was necessary in every entertainment venue. It was the same in the Bloody Seven Nights. Furthermore, in this place, you can also set up bets according to your own wishes. At this moment, Xian walked into a casino called the Treasure Trove Pavilion. The Treasure Trove Pavilion was extremely large, and there were a lot of tricks to play. Other than the usual dice, paijio and so on, there were also many people who came up with new ways to play. In any case, as long as you were willing, you could gamble however you wanted. At this time, Yi Xian was standing at a gambling table. The gambling table set up by the dealer here was quite interesting to Yi Xian. This guy had actually created several mini mazes. This maze had several small puppets. The gambling table's requirements were very simple. Whoever could control their own small puppet to reach the end first would be considered the winner. Then all the bets would belong to that person. The dealer would not personally participate in the gambling. After all, the maze was created by him. Even if he wanted to participate, no one would be willing to play with him. Controlling the small puppet could only be done with divine telekinesis. Therefore, the fine control of divine telekinesis was extremely high. The maze was also constantly changing. According to the dealer, his maze had a total of 9,999 types of random changes. Furthermore, it was constantly changing. Therefore, this also tested the gambler's mastery of array formations. It could be said that in order to win, not only must one have a certain foundation in array formations, one must also have an extremely strong divine telekinesis. Yi Xian saw that most of the people gathered here were array formation masters. This was because only array formation masters would dare to challenge this gambling table. If it were anyone else, even if their divine telekinesis was extremely strong, they would still be trapped in it if they did not understand array formations. Come. Place your bets. 10,000 spiritual stones for 1 round. There are 9 spots. Who else wants to sign up? Another round of gambling began. Yi Xian watched 1 round and had the idea of giving it a try. At this time, he casually threw down 10,000 spiritual stones and stood beside a small puppet. Oh, there's a newcomer. I haven't seen you before. A transformed divine beast beside Yi Xian looked at Yi Xian with a smile. Yi Xian also smiled and said lightly, "You've just arrived today." Haha, newcomer, you have to be careful. This puppet maze is not as simple as you think it is. Whether it is simple or not, we will only know after we try. Yi Xian said lightly. In fact, Yi Xian was quite confident in himself. After all, Yi Xian was an array formation master, a divine talisman master, and a restriction master. He was much stronger than these simple array formation masters. Therefore, Yi Xian was confident that he could defeat them. The 9 of them quickly gathered enough. The 90,000 spiritual stones were all kept by the dealer. The dealer did not stand on ceremony and directly took 5,000 spiritual stones. He had created this puppet maze to reap the benefits. Otherwise, why would he open a gambling house? Chapter 2458. Extracting the star sand. The dealer had already explained the basic operation method. Even if he didn't explain it, one could understand it just by looking at it once. Hence, at the start of the maze, everyone used their divine telekinesis to control their puppets and start moving forward. Yi Xian used his divine telekinesis to cover the entire maze. He carefully observed the changes within in order to find the path that the puppets would take. At the same time, he had to think of a way to prevent the other 8 from interfering with their divine telekinesis. In fact, this puppet maze was already considered a very mild gambling ground. The divine telekinesis of the 9 people wouldn't attack each other. However, with 9 divine telekinesis gathered in this small maze, it was inevitable that they would interfere with each other. Hence, everyone had to control the power of their divine telekinesis at all times to prevent their divine telekinesis from being interfered with. After all, once one's divine telekinesis was interfered with, it would be even more difficult to control. For example, at this moment, the person with Yi Xian didn't have enough control over his divine telekinesis and was being interfered with by the other 8 people. He couldn't even control his puppet. Yi Xian's divine telekinesis completely enveloped the small puppet and used it to form a complete defense around the puppet. Only 4 of the 9 people were able to do this. However, there were others who took a different approach. At this moment, one person turned his divine telekinesis into a tentacle that circled around his puppet. The tentacle had the ability to detect. Once it sensed interference from other divine telekinesis, it would immediately transform into a divine telekinesis shield to defend itself. The advantage of doing this was that the utilization of one's divine telekinesis was maximized and there was no need to waste much divine telekinesis. However, not everyone could do this. It could be said that this person's manipulation method required an extremely high level of divine telekinesis manipulation. The 9 people each used their best abilities to solve the maze while controlling the puppet to move forward. At this moment, no one around them interfered. After all, since they were here to play, they knew very well that the puppet maze required an extremely high level of concentration. Yi Xian's entire focus was on the puppet maze. His mind was rapidly deciphering the maze's spirit arrays and searching for a way out. The small puppet also stumbled forward. Yi Xian took a full hour to walk out of this tiny puppet labyrinth. Even so, he was the first to leave, and his speed was much faster than the second place. With 95,000 spirit stones in hand, Yi Xian didn't care too much about the spirit stones. Instead, he was more interested in the puppet maze. This was because he had only played it once, and he could clearly feel that his divine telekinesis micromanipulation had improved a little. It could be said that as long as Yi Xian played this puppet maze once a day, he would be able to rapidly improve his divine telekinesis micromanipulation. It was a pity that Yi Xian did not know how to create this puppet maze. Even if he could find a way to buy one from the dealer, there would not be a group of people competing with him with their telepathic thoughts like now, so it would not be of any use to him at all. Therefore, Yi Xian gave up on the idea of buying this puppet maze to train his divine telekinesis micromanipulation. After playing a round of the puppet maze, Yi Xian continued to walk forward. Not long after, he came across a strange gambling table. This dealer had actually obtained a large amount of a special mineral called the star sand from who knows where. This star sand was used to refine treasures and the like, but in reality, it did not have much use. However, the star sand had an extremely special attribute, and that was that it was extremely difficult to refine. Generally speaking, the weapon refiners of the realm of the gods would use the star sand as a material for their level assessment. Of course, the star sand was also divided into different levels, and the star sand on this gambling table was actually the highest level of existence. The rules of the gambling table were extremely simple. The star sand would be divided into several equal portions, and whoever could refine the star sand faster would win. Of course, if there was not much time left, the winner would be determined by the purity of the star sand extracted. Refining the star sand was a basic skill that every weapon refiner knew. Therefore, it was inevitable that there would be people who wanted to try and challenge it. Even if they clearly knew that since this person dared to set up a gambling table, it showed that he had extremely strong confidence in refining the star sand. Come, who wants to give it a try? Refining the star sand is a basic skill for every weapon refiner. 2 portions of star sand. Whoever finishes refining first will win. The minimum bet is 100,000 spirit stones. Who wants to give it a try? If you win, I'll pay you double. After winning once again, the banker happily put away the spirit stones he had won into his interspatial ring, and then began to shout loudly again. Yi Xian had been paying attention to this dealer's movements all along. What was strange was that this guy did not cheat, but his refining technique was very special. It was not a conventional refining technique at all, but a very strange one. Including Yi Xian, except for the dealer, most likely everyone else would feel extremely uncomfortable just by looking at it. His every move seemed to deliberately violate the rules of refining. Every move seemed to be so bold. It felt like this guy was not refining the material at all, but courting death. Li fire, mystic fire, extinguishing fire, serene fire, and calamity fire. 5 completely different refining flames, but this guy insisted on forcefully merging them into one. Not to mention the others, even Yi Xian wouldn't be able to do this with the help of the system. The fusion of 5 types of flames was definitely not a simple matter. This was because these 5 types of flames were not simple flames. Following that, this guy was extremely bold and risky when refining. Almost every time he refined, he would only stop when he reached a critical point of strength. Yi Xian was ashamed of his control. If this guy was just a little slower, the entire refining process was destined to be ruined. But he had grasped that delicate moment well. Genius! Yi Xian gave his evaluation with a thought. At the same time, he suddenly realized something. If this person could be called a genius in the demon god's domain, wasn't this person very likely to be a holy son? Yi Xian's gaze focused on that person, but he could not be sure. After all, this person did not show anything special. He silently remembered this person, and then left a very secretive spiritual will mark on this person. After that, Yi Xian left the gambling table. If this guy was a holy son, Then Yi Xian would like to see if he could get any useful information from him. Of course, everything was still unknown. Whether he was a holy son or not, Yi Xian would only know after testing him. Although this was only the level 1 district, there were all kinds of strange gambling fights, and the bets were all different. In this place, as long as you dared to make a bet, someone would dare to accept it. Yi Xian saw with his own eyes a guy who had gambled until his eyes were red. He actually put his life on the line. In the end, he lost, and then was marked with a slave mark. Chapter 2459. The gambling game. The gambling platform occupied a large area and was surrounded by a ring of pavilions. Blood Hunt. It could be said that this was a very popular gambling platform in the level 1 area. It was called a gambling platform because one could also gamble here. However, more than that, it was not gambling. The blood hunt was extremely brutal. In this circled area, it was deliberately divided into several large areas. Every time it opened, it might be a battle between 2 areas, 3, 4, or even more areas. There were many ways to play it. One could enter the battlefield and kill as one pleased. One could also choose an area and arrange one's troops according to one's wishes to attack other areas. Unfortunately, the moment Yi Xian saw this place, he almost went berserk. Humans. All of them were humans. In that place, no matter which area it was, there were imprisoned humans. It was very likely that those humans had been kept captive by this gambling platform for generations. At the end of a battle, at least tens of thousands of people would lose their lives. However, they would be replaced very quickly. When Yi Xian went over, one of the divine beasts had transformed into his true form and was killing to his heart's content. One after another, humans were torn apart by him. As if he was eating fruit, he grabbed a human in his hand and crushed them to death. The bright red blood was like a delicious drink that he casually swallowed. The unrestrained laughter of the other divine beasts could be heard from the surroundings. Perhaps in the eyes of those humans, these pavilions were so unreachable and so terrifying. This was because every time someone came down from these pavilions, there would be a storm of blood. Yi Xian actually did not want to cause trouble. His main purpose here was to relax and rest for a few days. However, who knew that even though he did not want to cause trouble, trouble would come to him. Step by step, Yi Xian walked directly to the banker's position. Hulala! A large pile of spirit stones was poured out, like a small mountain. On the other side, there was a pile of various resources. The banker was overjoyed. He immediately ran over and asked Yi Xian, "Honorable guest, how do you want to play?" That person did not realize the anger in Yi Xian's heart. He thought that Yi Xian was here to have some fun, so he was very enthusiastic. Yi Xian's expression was cold as he asked, "You can play however you want here, right?" "Of course, honorable guest. As long as you want to play, we can provide you with it." "Very good." After Yi Xian finished speaking, he waved his hand and a total of 10 ancient resources were thrown into the pile of spirit stones. "I will use these as wagers. Whoever wants these spirit stones and resources will fight me. Regardless of life or death. Defeat me and these resources will all be yours." Yi Xian said this sentence was directed to everyone here. Because in Yi Xian's heart, he had already decided that these people deserved to die. The divine beast in the field also heard this sentence. At this time, he had already returned to his human form. He looked at the pile of spirit stones and resources in surprise. There were probably millions of spirit stones. The most important thing was the 10 ancient resources. It could be said that everyone was jealous of them. "I'll do it, kid. Is this a life or death wager? Grandpa will play with you." The divine beast in the middle of the field shouted arrogantly like a great god. In fact, he had already seen that Yi Xian's strength had reached the superior divine emperor realm. However, he was a rank 5 superior divine emperor realm expert, so he was not afraid. Yi Xian was waiting for this sentence. As long as he dared to accept the challenge, Yi Xian would not let him go. This was the Sanguine 7 Knights. Yi Xian naturally did not dare to cause trouble openly. However, since it was a wager, then it was legal to kill. Yi Xian suddenly jumped into the field and unsheathed his god-slaying sword. He did not give the divine beast a chance to speak and directly attacked. God-slaying slash. One sword, just one sword, and it had already cut the divine beast in half. Even after cutting it in half, Yi Xian was not satisfied. With a wave of his hand, The divine beast's body was cut into thousands of pieces. Yi Xian raised his hand and pointed. He directly asked the divine beasts in the pavilion, "Who's next?" Although Yi Xian had killed a divine beast, it did not frighten the other divine beasts. After all, in the demon god's domain, killing was more common than in the Kunlun domain. At this time, Yi Xian had taken out so many resources. How could the divine beasts be willing to leave? "Let me!" Suddenly, a divine beast landed in the field. As soon as it landed, it immediately transformed into its original form. It was a strange big bird. The moment this guy landed on the ground, he flapped his wings and a violent force swept towards Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was not moved at all. Below the Divine Emperor realm, even if it was a 9th grade Divine Emperor realm peak, Yi Xian was not completely powerless. One by one, no matter how many came, Yi Xian would kill them all today. Weren't these people greedy for his treasures? Then let's see if they had the strength. This was a gamble. At the beginning, Yi Xian had already said that they were gambling with their lives. Therefore, those who coveted Yi Xian's treasures would have to be prepared to lose their lives. Moreover, this was a grade 1 area. If there were a few divine emperors, they would be considered strong. Naturally, there would not be any enemies of a higher realm. 1, 2, 3. Yi Xian's pile of spiritual stones and resources made the divine beasts jump into the field as if they did not care about their lives. In their hearts, Yi Xian's resources were worth their lives. And Yi Xian's experience in battle made them feel that an opportunity was right in front of them. Every time Yi Xian killed a divine beast, he would take its corpse away. This way, only some bloodstains could be seen in the field. This way, the divine beasts would not feel too much pressure. Therefore, these divine beasts continued to send themselves to their deaths. At this moment, the one who was most worried was the banker. At this moment, the banker was sweating profusely. After all, he was the one who agreed to this bet. At first, when he saw that Yi Xian was only a 1st grade divine emperor, he thought that he would have a chance to take away those resources. He even arranged for 2 of his capable subordinates to challenge him. But when Yi Xian exploded with a powerful battle strength, he regretted it. It could be said that the banker's greatest wish was for Yi Xian to stop killing. Although the bet was voluntary, if too many people died at his gambling table, he could forget about continuing to do business in the future. Moreover, every gambling table had a death limit. If the death limit was exceeded, the white giants would question them. Their questioning methods would not be gentle. It would be good enough if they could keep their lives. At this moment, the banker looked at Yi Xian, who was wantonly killing in the field. Finally, he could not hold it in anymore and knelt in front of Yi Xian. "Senior, please don't kill them. This humble one is willing to compensate you for your losses. As long as you ask, this humble one will do his best to satisfy you." Chapter 2460. Incomparably stifling translator, Sparrow Translations editor. Sparrow Translations. Upon hearing the banker's pleas, Yi Xian was no longer as angry as before. He said to the banker, "You want me to stop the bet? Sure. I'll give you a chance. Hand over all your human slaves to me. Otherwise, I'll kill every single one of them on sight." What an arrogant and domineering tone. If this were any other place or person, they would definitely be treated as a fool if they dared to speak so arrogantly. However, in this place, no one doubted Yi Xian's words. Because Yi Xian had the strength to back it up. Yi Xian had already used the lives of nearly 100 divine beasts to prove his strength. He was a strength that the banker and no one else here dared to defy. The banker's expression changed enormously. In truth, he was keeping human slaves in captivity. Furthermore, there were millions of them. However, those human slaves were his cash cows. Without them, how would he be able to attract customers? "Senior, how about I give you some spirit stones? I'm willing to give you 10 million spirit stones as a reward for your hard work." 10 million? Yi Xian glanced at him disdainfully. The banker thought that Yi Xian thought it was too little and immediately raised the price. 20 million, 20 million. "Senior, I'll give you 20 million, but would you please stop the bet?" "I'll say it one more time. Call out all your human slaves. Otherwise, don't interfere with my bet." The banker wanted to wash his hands of this matter, but he didn't dare to do so. After all, the white giants were simple-minded and wouldn't care so much. In their eyes, Since they saw Yi Xian fighting in the banker's territory, they would only cause trouble for the banker. The white giants were simple-minded to begin with. Combined with the strict style of the Great Ant tribe, rules were rules in the Bloody Seven Nights. They were unbreakable. The banker wanted to slap himself hard across the face. Why did he have to be so greedy? If not, he wouldn't have provoked a murderous god like Yi Xian. Unfortunately, it was useless to say anything now. He could only choose to accept or not. The consequences of not accepting would be to face questioning from the white giants. Compared to that, losing a few human slaves was acceptable. All right, I accept your conditions. I'll give you all my human slaves. The banker gritted his teeth. The Zhuang family gnashed their teeth as they spoke. In their hearts, they already hated Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't care. He immediately opened the devouring space and sucked all the 1 million humans into it. Now that there were 12 divine trees of laws in the devouring space was constantly expanding. Therefore, there was no pressure from the devouring space at all. Yi Xian after Yi Xian, he left. Yi Xian was very clear that if he did this, the Zhuang family would definitely hate him, and the Zhuang family would definitely find someone to take care of him. However, Yi Xian had no choice but to do so. These were the lives of 1 million humans. How could Yi Xian just sit by and do nothing? Of course, even if these people wanted to take revenge on Yi Xian, they would have to wait until Yi Xian left the Bloody Seven Nights. Unless they were prepared to declare war against the White Giants and the Great Ant tribe, they wouldn't dare make a move in the Bloody Seven Nights. Yi Xian had originally thought that since he had saved 1 million people, there wouldn't be many humans in the Bloody Seven Nights who would suffer. Unfortunately, Yi Xian had miscalculated. Not long after he left, he encountered a similar gambling platform. This one was even more bloody and cruel. The 9 Nether Earth fire was a divine flame that would never be extinguished. Furthermore, the temperature of this divine flame was extremely low. Wherever it shone, it would immediately turn that place into a land of ice. And this gambling platform had somehow obtained a 1-star 9 Nether Earth fire. This guy used the 9 Nether Earth fire as a guide, and then wrapped it with ordinary mysterious fire, hanging it high above a pavilion. Every once in a while, 100 people of the human clan would be pushed into it. The surrounding people could then bet on how long those people could survive, and who would be the last one to freeze to death. Because the mystic fire could raise the temperature of the 9 Nether Earth fire, the surrounding people could clearly see how the 100 humans froze to death. There were many heating items in the venue, but there were also many traps set up. If one wanted to survive, they had to work together as a team to obtain the heating items. However, the heating items were limited, so some people were destined to die. The lucky survivors would face all kinds of tests. In order to survive, those who were pushed in would kill each other and step on the corpses of their comrades just to live a little longer. It was such a cruel scene, but these people were watching it with relish. Yi Xian was enraged. Because of the uniqueness of this place, Yi Xian couldn't directly kill everyone, but Yi Xian could make use of the rules here. Ancient resources were extremely rare and special in the realm of the gods. Even one was enough to cause a bloodbath. Yi Xian cleverly made use of the greed of these divine beasts. He still set up an arena, a life gambling arena, and killed these divine beasts one by one. Yi Xian didn't mind that these divine beasts were of a lower realm. They couldn't even surprise him. As long as they were divine beasts, as long as they dared to enter the arena, Yi Xian would kill them. One house after another, as long as they dared to use humans as entertainment, Yi Xian would visit them one by one and slaughter them endlessly. In a short 3 months, the number of divine beasts that died under Yi Xian's hands was probably no less than 10,000. And the number of humans that Yi Xian rescued had already reached 10 million. The madman's fame began to spread in the Bloody Seven Nights first-level region. Many people knew of a person who specialized in life gambling. That person wielded a giant sword in his hand and would occasionally use a divine bow. In every battle, he would leave no survivors. That person actively sought challenges. Every time he challenged, he would use ancient resources as a wager. If he won, he would obtain the 10 ancient resources. If he lost, he would leave his life behind. Actually, ever since he left the ancestral grounds of the Monkey Clan, Yi Xian already knew that there was a reason why the human race was in such a predicament in the realm of the gods. Perhaps the only way to completely solve this problem was to find the root cause. Now that Yi Xian was killing everywhere, it was an extremely unwise choice. Even with the system helping him hide his identity, it was inevitable that he would be discovered one day. When that time came, it would be difficult for him to move an inch. It wasn't that Yi Xian didn't understand this logic, but to let his own race suffer and ignore it, Yi Xian couldn't do it. Even if he clearly knew that doing so would only provoke an even stronger enemy, Yi Xian had to do this. After all, if he didn't do this, Yi Xian's conscience wouldn't be able to live with it. Once a shadow was left in his heart, what awaited Yi Xian would be the eruption of his inner demons. Chapter 2461. Chapter 2461. Chapter 2461-Out of course, Yi Xian wasn't wrong. However, his actions had ultimately offended the interests of some people. Coupled with the arrest warrant, it could be said that Yi Xian never expected that all the dangers would erupt at the same time. In the beginning, it was the villains who found Yi Xian after seeing the appearance of the Godslayer in the restaurant. They wanted to kill Yi Xian and take the Godslayer for themselves. But before they could do anything, they were dealt with by another group of people. However, these people were not here to help Yi Xian. They were here to retrieve what they had lost from Yi Xian. These people were none other than the dealers who had been challenged and ruined by Yi Xian. Don't underestimate these dealers. Since they opened a casino here, they naturally had their own power. It was just that they didn't know about Yi Xian's background, so they didn't make a move. Until a wanted order was sent to the Bloody Seven Knights. This was a bounty issued by the joint efforts of several super-powerful experts. Naturally, these powerhouses represented several powerful forces. The content of the warrant was very simple. It only had a portrait of Yi Xian and a description of the mission. This time, the major forces had put in a lot of money. The rewards they offered were hard for ordinary people to refuse. Just the spiritual stones alone were worth a total of 1 billion. 1 billion spirit stones. This was a crazy number, not to mention that in addition to the 1 billion spirit stones, there were also countless precious treasures. Just the right to rent land for the blessing was a total of 10 times. A bounty that made countless people go crazy. A bounty that no one could refuse. Fortunately, this time, the few powerhouses had publicly announced the arrest warrant, so Yi Xian had received the news immediately. Standing silently on top of a building, the two Godslayer swords circled around Yi Xian. Yi Xian held the law bow in his hands. The Divine Wood Sword Servants and Divine Blossom Sword Servants also silently stood guard beside Yi Xian. In front of them were countless divine beasts. These divine beasts had rushed to Yi Xian immediately after receiving the arrest warrant and surrounded Yi Xian. They might not be strong, and there were only a few of them who had reached the High Divine Emperor realm. However, Yi Xian was very clear that these people only needed to trap him for half a cup of tea's time. Then, Yi Xian could forget about leaving this place alive. Kill! Yi Xian suddenly exploded with a loud roar and charged towards the thousands of enemies. A bloody storm in the blink of an eye. The entire sky. At this time, Yi Xian. As long as he was trapped here, Yi Xian would definitely fall. Therefore, how could Yi Xian dare to hide his strength? Activating Dharma, Thousand-Hand Child. Another new Dharma idol had been activated. Dharma 2A Dharma was extremely hard. It could be said that Dharma idol was Yi Xian's final trump card. But at this point, Yi Xian could not afford to hesitate. It was said that the Thousand Hands Child Prodigy's original form was a boy who cultivated a special divine ability. After 1,000,000 years of continuous training, he obtained a special divine ability, the Thousand Hands Divine Ability. The Thousand Hands Divine Ability was to use a special method to link the 1,000 arms with the main body, giving the main body the ability to control the 1,000 arms. This was not a simple method of gathering and taking form, but a true hand of divine power and spiritual will. It was said that in the entire divine world, it was hard to find anyone who could fuse their divine will and God force together to surpass the Thousand Hands Prodigy. The God-slaying sword had already rushed out. Under Wei Zhentian's control, they were the vanguard. Yi Xian advanced courageously, and any enemy who dared to obstruct Yi Xian would be beheaded by him one by one. A bloody path was formed in an instant because Yi Xian had rushed through it. This time, Yi Xian did not even bother to devour the low-level divine beasts' corpses. He allowed them to form a bloody path. Along the way, Yi Xian did not encounter any obstructions until Yi Xian reached the entrance of the secret territory. At this moment, 7 experts were already blocking the exit. This was the strongest force that the Bloody Seven Knights could muster in the shortest amount of time possible. Yi Xian also saw the wanted poster at the first moment and didn't hesitate to attack, causing the Bloody Seven Knights to have no time to react. The only thing they could do was to gather all the Divine Emperors in the Level 1 area. 7 people. 7 people with different appearances. Clearly, they were from 7 different races. Among them, there was a person who was more than 3 meters tall who was the most respected. He was the supervisor of the Level 1 area. You cannot pass. The fierce white giant tribe. From the tone of his voice, it was clear that this person was from the fierce white giant tribe. Kid, listen to us obediently and come with us. Perhaps after you hand over the treasure, we can consider sparing your life. After all, the higher-ups want the treasure, not your life. The thousand-eyed wolf frog tribe. As expected of the most obedient dog of the fierce white giant tribe. As soon as the supervisor finished speaking, this guy immediately took over the conversation. Yi Xian glanced at the thousand-eyed wolf frog, but did not look at him for a moment. This guy was not worthy of Yi Xian's attention. A mere third-grade divine emperor ant. Yi Xian really did not know where he got the guts to challenge Yi Xian. Yi Xian's attention was on a young man in white. This white-clothed youth held a folding fan in his hand. He seemed to be very elegant and handsome. However, if one knew what his true form was, they would not think so. Of course, Yi Xian did not care about that. What he cared about was the young man's cultivation base. According to the system's detection, this guy was at the peak of the 9th-grade Divine Emperor realm. In other words, he was strong enough to pose a threat to Yi Xian. If Yi Xian really fought with this person, he would only have a 50-50 chance of winning. Of course, Yi Xian had many auxiliary methods. He even had the help of the Divine Wood Sword servants. However, this guy also had 6 Divine Emperors by his side. Therefore, this battle was not going to be an easy one. However, it was not going to be an easy battle. Did Yi Xian have any other choice? Wei Zhantian, kill him! Following Yi Xian's roar, Wei Zhantian controlled the god-slaying sword to slash at 2 average enemies. Yi Xian's plan was very simple. He just had to kill these weaker enemies first. Divine Wood Sword servants, block him! With another command, the Divine Wood Sword servants moved instantly and charged directly at the 7 people. The Divine Wood Sword servants had strong defensive abilities, so naturally, they would be blocked by Yi Xian. After receiving the order, the Divine Wood Sword servants did not hesitate and charged forward. However, Yi Xian's call was not yet over. Divine Flower Sword servants. Come out, God-tier mounts. Chapter 2462. Absolute dominance. As soon as the God Blossom Sword attendants appeared, they summoned the 100 Blossom Flower God. Together with their God-tier mounts, they charged in all directions. This was because around Yi Xian, there were countless enemies who were not strong enough but wanted to take advantage of the situation. These guys did not seem to have much of an impact on the surface, but Yi Xian knew very well that sometimes, it was these small fries that could change the outcome of a battle. Even if the possibility was very small, as long as they existed, Yi Xian had to eliminate them. Before the God-tier mounts and God Blossom Sword attendants evolved, they might not be able to keep up with Yi Xian's strength, but they were more than enough to support him. After doing all this, Yi Xian pulled out his Rule Divine Bow and shot out 7 consecutive arrows. Each arrow contained the power of the engulfing rule. Furthermore, Yi Xian also used the Divine Telekinesis sword that he had just obtained. Similarly, he shot out 7 arrows. It could be said that this was the most powerful attack that Yi Xian could unleash, and all of this happened in just a moment. Especially the last 2 fatal attacks. The enemy did not even have time to react before the attacks arrived. Except for the Divine Emperor at the peak of the 9th-grade Divine Emperor realm, the others were immediately flustered by Yi Xian's explosive attacks. 4 of them were directly killed by Yi Xian on the spot. His terrifying strength made everyone in the 7 Knights of Blood cry out in alarm. Perhaps just a moment ago, some of them were ready to attack Yi Xian. But at this moment, almost no one dared to have such thoughts. Terrifying, it was too terrifying. This guy could unleash such a violent attack in such a short time. This was beyond the imagination of these divine beasts. Countless divine beasts retreated. Yi Xian stood there, among the crowd. He did not speak, did not move and did not attack. But with just one attack, Yi Xian's strength was enough to make all the divine beasts collapse. Too strong, This person was really too strong. He was definitely not someone they could resist. At this moment, the remaining 3 divine emperors looked at Yi Xian in shock. Just a moment ago, they were confident that it would be a piece of cake to take down Yi Xian. After all, Yi Xian was only a superior divine emperor. But a moment later, they didn't have the same idea anymore. Could a cultivator of the first divine emperor layer really show that kind of strength? No one answered. However, no matter who it was, even the guy at the peak of the superior level 9 divine emperor realm, he did not dare to say anything. Give. Or not. Yi Xian looked at the remaining 3 divine emperor realm experts in front of him and said indifferently. His tone was incomparably cold. Now, Yi Xian gave them a chance to choose. 2 options. No third option. Brat, don't be so arrogant. This is the bloody 7 Knights. Don't think you can leave here alive. Shua. The god-slaying sword, which was suspended in mid-air, did not stop for even a moment. It charged over, and before the person who spoke could react, it had already shattered his godhead. Even after the 2 god-slaying swords destroyed that person's godhead, they did not stop. They even cut the divine beast's body into thousands of pieces at an incomparably fast speed. Silence. Silence. There was not a single sound coming from the entrance. Wasn't this too domineering? One had to know that the person Yi Xian had just killed was the only high-level divine emperor. At first, the divine beasts were still hoping that the powerhouse would be able to kill Yi Xian. However, he had already been sliced into pieces by Yi Xian. Of course, these people did not notice that most of the mystical beast's body had already been devoured by Yi Xian. At this moment, it was just for show. In fact, Yi Xian's attack was premeditated. Now that he was surrounded, he could only use his absolute power to intimidate his enemies. It would not be difficult for Yi Xian to kill these divine beasts. However, if he did that, it would cause unnecessary waste of time. Yi Xian did not have that much time to waste. Therefore, in fact, this was already Yi Xian's strongest attack. From the moment he saw these 7 people, Yi Xian had been preparing his strongest attack. Who else? Yi Xian closed his eyes slightly and said indifferently. His voice was full of indifference, but at the same time, it contained an infinite amount of pressure. The first time he attacked, he killed 4 divine emperors and blocked the attack of thousands of soldiers and horses at the same time. The second time he attacked, he killed a peak level 9 divine emperor super expert in an instant. That expert did not even have time to cry out in alarm. Therefore, many people were puzzled. If Yi Xian were to use the third move, what would the result be? The moment Yi Xian's gaze fell on them, the 2 divine beast experts that were blocking the entrance of the secret realm retreated to both sides without the slightest hesitation. They didn't dare to stop him because they didn't have the strength to do so. If they went up now, they would undoubtedly be waiting for death. At this moment, the people around them did not need to be mentioned. Almost everyone hurriedly retreated to the back, as if they would be killed by Yi Xian if they got too close to Yi Xian. Wherever Yi Xian's eyes passed, there was only infinite fear. These divine beasts knew very well that even if the reward on the bounty was very generous, it was not something they could easily touch. Therefore, at this moment, since they had already seen Yi Xian's strength, why should they send themselves to their deaths? Since the path had been opened, Yi Xian naturally did not hesitate and immediately walked out. After walking out of the secret realm, Yi Xian casually threw out the eternal night realm. In an instant, at the entrance of the secret realm, anyone who entered would find it difficult to see anything. Even if they used their divine thoughts, they would not be able to see through it. Yi Xian quickly ran forward. After all, since the bloody 7 Knights had received the news, there was no need to mention the outside. There were probably many dangers waiting for Yi Xian outside. This was not a place to stay for long. To escape, he had to leave this place as quickly as possible. Otherwise, once the experts of the bloody 7 Knights caught up, he would not be able to escape. Now, Yi Xian did not have any goals at all. In his mind, there was only how to escape from the encirclement and how to survive in the demon god's domain. With a bounty on his head, Yi Xian would not be able to move an inch from now on. It could be said that almost the entire demon god's domain was Yi Xian's enemy. Live to find a way to enter the Kunlun god's domain, and at the same time, try to find Luolua's whereabouts. Chapter 2463. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Holy Sun. Yixian moved forward quickly. He walked for thousands of miles. At this moment, Yixian was standing in front of a tall mountain. This mountain was rather strange, as if it was a divine beast that was sealed by some sort of power. Its appearance was incomparably strange. However, Yixian felt that it was impossible, because on this mountain, the divine trees were gorgeous and the beasts were endless. If this mountain was a living divine beast, then it should not be able to grow divine trees, let alone attract small beasts. However, just as Yixian was admiring the mountain, a voice suddenly sounded. It was like a clap of thunder. At the same time the voice sounded, a big bald head had already rushed over. Haha, so it's the kid on the wanted list. I said that I would encounter something good today. Sure enough. Kid, come here. I heard that your head is very valuable. Give me your head in exchange for some wine money. What a domineering tone. The most important thing was that when this guy said these words, he looked as if it was natural that Yixian's head could be exchanged for divine wine. It was Yixian's honor. Drunk maniac, slow down. Suddenly, two figures chased after him, but from their tone, it was obvious that their status was much lower than drunk maniacs. However, the difference in strength was not big. System, detect this person's strength, and at the same time, check their race. Ding. System notification, this detection will consume 100,000 people's faith points. Does the host confirm? Confirm. Ding. System notification. Target is a superior rank 4 divine emperor, with a title of king rank front crown. Race. Heavenly Dragon Drunk Shrimp Tribe. Host, please note that the designated target is the Heavenly Dragon Drunk Shrimp Tribe's Holy Sun. A Holy Sun? Yixian suddenly raised his head, but his heart was filled with joy. This was like wearing out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it without any effort. At first, Yixian planned to kill these holy suns everywhere to find out Luolua's whereabouts. However, before he had time to take action, he had already reached this situation. He did not expect to meet a holy sun just as he arrived here. Hey, brat, what are you looking at? Lord Saint is talking to you. Why aren't you answering? Beside the holy sun, a skinny follower opened his eyes wide. His eyes were filled with disdain for Yixian. However, this guy's eyes kept trying to pry into the interspatial ring on Yixian's finger. Yixian was nothing. In the hearts of these three people, Yixian was just an insignificant beauty. However, in the Qiankuan ring in Yixian's hand, there was a treasure that even their Sky Dragon Drunk Shrimp clan's patriarch wanted to obtain. Therefore, this guy's gaze naturally stopped on Yixian's interspatial ring. As for the other lackey, after seeing Yixian, he was stunned for a moment before he took out his own treasure. Obviously, he also knew who Yixian was and was ready to attack. Yixian glanced at the three people. These three people were strong, and most importantly, there was a holy sun among them. He must have mastered many special abilities or treasures. However, even so, Yixian did not care at all. With a wave of his hand, the two god-slaying swords flew out. Since he knew that negotiation was not the way to solve the problem, why would Yixian waste time to negotiate? It was better to just kill him directly. Boom, boom. The two god-slaying swords attacked two different places. The sudden attack, coupled with the power of the god-slaying swords, directly sent the two followers flying. However, it was impossible to kill them so easily. The two people were only pushed back a few steps and were already fighting with the god-slaying swords. Brat, you dare to attack me? Looks like you are tired of living. The Holy Sun did not expect Yixian to attack first. At this moment, he was furious. However, he did not expect that he would give Yixian a way out. The moment he appeared, he immediately asked Yixian to hand over his head. Wasn't this equivalent to asking Yixian to commit suicide? This Holy Sun had probably been spoiled for too long. It was so long that he had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. It was so long that he could not distinguish between good and bad. Yixian would not care about such people. There was no need to try to reason with them. These people were so spoiled by their race that they could not distinguish between good and bad. Their thoughts were different from others. Therefore, the best way to talk to them was to use strength to speak. Yixian held the Rule Divine Bow in his hand, but Yixian launched a Divine Will attack first. A Divine Will sword suddenly appeared and charged directly towards the Holy Sun's Sea of Consciousness. The sudden divine will attack made the Holy Sun panic. However, as Yixian had expected, this guy was a divine beast and had many different kinds of magic treasures. A divine wood pendant suddenly burst into a bright light and blocked the divine will attack for the Holy Sun. With a bow sound, the divine wood pendant shattered. The Holy Sun looked at the divine wood pendant in front of his chest in surprise. After a moment, his face was filled with anger. "Brat! How dare you destroy my pendant? I'm going to kill you. Kill you. Go to hell." Boom! An extremely violent force was unleashed in an instant. That violent force broke through several mountains and left a huge ravine behind Yixian. Yixian also clearly saw this guy's attack method. He had actually achieved a perfect fusion of the Dharma power and his own body. One had to know that at the moment this guy launched his attack, Yixian clearly saw a huge lobster Dharma power. This Holy Sun was the Holy Sun of the celestial dragon drunk shrimp tribe. As for him, his Dharma power was in the shape of a lobster, so it was not worth mentioning. Yixian was not surprised by this. Yixian found it strange that when he attacked, the Dharma power actually followed his movements and attacked at the same time. A high degree of fusion between the Dharma power and the body. Without a doubt, this was a good thing. The power of the Dharma power was very strong, especially the power of some special Dharma powers. Ordinary people would at most borrow the power of the Dharma power and use the special mystique of the Dharma power as a means of attack. For example, Yixian had used the Thousand Venerables bloodline Dharma power several times. In fact, he was borrowing the mystique of the Dharma power. However, the use of the Dharma power was not limited to just borrowing power. The Dharma power could also be fused with the body. Once it was successful, not to mention a 100% fusion rate, even if there was a 70% fusion rate, the combat power that could be unleashed would be extremely terrifying. It could be said that even the title of a Venerables was nothing in the face of fusion. However, fusing with the Dharma power was of course not a simple matter. Finding a suitable Dharma power was already very difficult. One also had to have a suitable compatibility rate with the Dharma power before they could fuse. All of this had already been decided. Fusing with the Dharma power was not something that ordinary people could do. Only the core disciples of the major factions could do it. Chapter 2464. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios a new use for the Gravity God Arrow. However, Yixian had not expected to meet such a Dharma fusion user. Yixian smirked. He had already made up his mind. The Sky Dragon Drunk Prawn's Dharma power was not that strong. Besides, even if he gave it to Yixian, Yixian would just store it as one of the Dharma powers collected from the bloodline of Wan Zun. However, if he subdued this saint as well, the effect of this was very great. Yixian was confident that he could fuse this guy's Dharma power to its fullest potential. When the time came, he would have an extra fighter. Puppet technique. This was Yixian's plan. Of course, although it was a good idea, it was very difficult to realize. However, Yixian had a backup plan. At most, he would beat this guy half to death and then throw him into the devouring space to slowly train him. Yixian lowered his head as he pondered over his own matters. The Holy Sun didn't know what Yixian was scheming at all. At this moment, he, who was furious from embarrassment, had already pounced towards Yixian. "Kid, how dare you destroy my pendant? I will kill you. I will definitely kill you." He punched out, and a huge lobster claw appeared in the sky. It looked like it was carved from jade. It looked so exquisite, but it was also so violent. Yixian immediately activated his infinite teleportation and dodged in an instant. In an instant, a huge crater 100 meters wide appeared where Yixian had been standing. After missing a single move, the Holy Sun's voice moved as he quickly charged towards Yixian. His hands continuously waved, turning this entire area into a terrifying purgatory. However, such a seemingly crazy attack couldn't injure Yixian in the slightest. Yixian really wanted to ask this guy if he was really stupid. He only knew how to fight in close quarters. Did he not have any mystiques? What about his nomological law attacks? What about his domain? Was this guy so stupid that he did not know how to use them? However, just because he did not use them did not mean that Yixian did not use them. Absolute zero. Yixian immediately activated his special mystique, preparing to trap this guy in place. However, a strange scene occurred. Absolute Zero's strength was actually broken by this guy's punch. Using his fists to break a divine ability.
If it was in the past, Yi Xian wouldn't even dare to think about it. How powerful was the divine ability? How could someone break it with their fists? Unfortunately, someone had done it now. Yi Xian could clearly see that when the power of Absolute Zero pounced on the Holy Sun, the Holy Sun had also punched out. Then, the Holy Sun's fist paused for a moment, and he felt a mysterious power dissipate. Without a doubt, that was the sign of Absolute Zero being defeated. Someone had actually used their fists to break the divine ability. Yi Xian refused to believe this. With a thought, he launched another attack. Eternal Night Domain. This time, Yi Xian had activated the power of his domain. He wanted to see if this guy could break through his domain. Boom! There was a loud noise. Yi Xian opened his mouth slightly, as he was too shocked. This Holy Sun had really done it. He had actually used his fists to break through the domain. This guy is weird. Yi Xian thought to himself. This Holy Sun could use his fists to break a divine ability, and he could also use his fists to break a domain. In the past, Yi Xian could be said to have never heard of such a strange situation. At this moment, Yi Xian's idea of taking down this Holy Sun was even more confirmed. Subdue him, and then investigate his strange abilities. This was not just the effect of the fusion of Dharma powers. Yi Xian did not even need to ask the system to know this. Therefore, this Holy Sun was hiding a huge secret. If Yi Xian obtained it, his strength would definitely increase greatly. Yi Xian suddenly activated his nomological mystique technique. Don't you like to break divine abilities? In that case, Yi Xian wanted to see if this guy would tire. Gravity Law Enhancement. This time, Yi Xian had completely used the divine sword of the law of gravity. The power of this law was practically useless, unless you could cultivate it to the limit and borrow the boundless gravity to have a certain effect. Otherwise, the power of the gravity law was not enough to hurt anyone. However, this was different from the past. At this moment, the power of the gravity law was undoubtedly the most suitable power. Simply put, Yi Xian was making use of the gravity law divine arrow to create the illusion of a fist attack. If it were any other time, the law of gravity divine arrow would be able to smash two unlucky fools to death, to put it bluntly. However, at this moment, because of the huge gravity, it was a good way to fight the Holy Sun. The three arrows were like three huge fists smashing towards the Holy Sun. In the end, just like Yi Xian had imagined, the Holy Sun swung his fists without hesitation and smashed them towards the gravity law divine arrow. Boom! A berserk power erupted in an instant. The Chosen had never imagined that this attack would actually be such a method. With a loud boom, the Holy Sun was pushed back several steps by the violent force. It's effective. Yi Xian smiled slightly. At the same time, he drew the gravity law divine bow in his hand again. This time, 7 arrows were shot consecutively. 7 consecutive gravity law divine arrows smashed towards the Holy Sun. However, what Yi Xian did not expect was that the Holy Sun was like a fool. He did not dodge at all and actually used his fists to clash with the gravity law divine arrows. Yi Xian shook his head helplessly. This guy probably had many powerful techniques, but unfortunately, he did not know how to use them. His clan was probably a very large clan. As for him, as the holy son of the clan, he had probably never really fought with anyone since he was young. Even if he did fight a few times, it was only to bully the weak. Perhaps he had fought with opponents of the same level before. However, with his identity as the Holy Sun, who would dare to disobey him? The method of battle would probably be carried out safely according to his wishes. Yi Xian curled his lips in disdain. This kind of guy was no threat to Yi Xian at all. Yi Xian attacked left and right. While attacking the Holy Sun, he could still find time to attack the 2 followers. The followers were not weak, and there were no flaws in their use of mystiques. It was a pity that they had encountered Yi Xian. 2 god-slaying swords were not enough? Yi Xian could still send out the divine wood sword servants. In just a short while, Yi Xian had already disposed of the 2 followers. Then, he began to ravage the Holy Sun with great interest. For such a person, as long as he was beaten into fear and submission, he would not dare to resist. This was because Yi Xian had encountered such a person before. Gravity divine arrows? Just by using the most ordinary gravity divine arrows, Yi Xian had suppressed the holy son of the celestial dragon drunk shrimp tribe into submission. This guy was so silly that he was adorable. Chapter 2465. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios taking in a holy son as a little brother after being sent flying by the gravity god Arrow time and time again, the holy son finally couldn't take it anymore. One had to know that Yi Xian's control over his strength was extremely good. Even if he wanted to make this guy feel pain, he wouldn't really take this guy's life. The continuous attacks left the holy son bruised and battered. His body was covered in wounds. However, these were just superficial wounds. Yi Xian did not even use too much force to inflict internal injuries. Yi Xian did not stop attacking when he heard the holy son beg for mercy. Instead, he released another gravity god arrow and said calmly, "You want me to let you go? Why should I? My father is one of the 8 divine generals under the divine master, Sky Dragon Divine General. As long as you let me go, I will give you whatever you want." Sky Dragon Divine General. One of the 8 divine generals. Yi Xian was stunned. He had not expected that the holy son he had stumbled upon would be the son of one of the 8 divine generals. No wonder this guy was so arrogant and had so many precious treasures. The identity of the 8 great divine generals was already at the top of the pyramid in the demon god's divine domain. Other than the divine lord of the demon god's divine domain, these 8 great divine generals were probably the noblest. They were even larger than the remaining territory that Yi Xian had managed in Kunlun. In that case, it was not too strange for him to have some special resources. "All right, I can spare your life. Hand over your quintessence fragment and become my little brother. Then I will let you go." Handing over the divine deity fragment was actually equivalent to becoming a slave. However, Yi Xian knew that if he were to say that, then this fellow would rather die than obey. But in other words, it would be easier for this guy to accept becoming a little brother. After all, someone like him probably had a lot of underlings in the past. As expected, the holy son frowned slightly when he heard Yi Xian's words. However, he did not reject immediately. "No, my father is Sky Dragon Divine General. I will not become someone's little brother." "Is that so? Then there is no room for negotiation?" Yi Xian smirked as he activated his Law Divine technique once more. 7 Law of Gravity divine arrows shot out without hesitation. Yi Xian didn't have a complete grasp of this kind of person's thoughts, but he had a general idea. "You want to save face?" Unfortunately, Yi Xian had an expression as if he wanted his life. Boom, boom, boom. Divine arrows of the law of gravity kept knocking this guy away. "Stop, stop, I promise you." He finally gave in and handed over his quintessence fragment without hesitation. With a wave of his hand, Yi Xian collected the quintessence fragment. From this moment on, the fate of the chosen saint was completely in the hands of Yi Xian. Of course, if he wanted to truly display his battle prowess, he would need to be properly trained. However, with the protection of the son of Sky Dragon Divine General, Yi Xian would be much safer in the demon god domain. Furthermore, he might even be able to obtain more benefits. In order to prevent the battle here from attracting new enemies, Yi Xian quickly left with the chosen saint. "Tell me, what's your name?" "My name is Jianghu." "You boss, what's your name?" The Sky Dragon Holy Son seemed to have not fully adapted to his new identity. Fortunately, Yi Xian was in a good mood and did not hold it against him. "My name is Yi Xian." After giving a casual reply, Yi Xian turned to Jianghu and said, "Let's go, bring me to a place to rest. I need a good rest." Jianghu nodded and led the way. There was a reason why Yi Xian did not train this guy yet. At this time, Yi Xian was still in the demon god domain. Jianghu could undoubtedly provide protection for Yi Xian. Of course, this was on the premise that he did not arouse suspicion. Hence, only by keeping this guy in his original appearance would the people in the demon god domain be convinced. Yi Xian casually exchanged for a mask from the system store. Once this mask was worn, it could conceal Yi Xian's appearance and cultivation. Of course, anyone with a higher cultivation than Yi Xian would be able to see through it. However, Yi Xian was not worried at all. Now that he was walking with Jianghu, there would be very few people in the demon god domain who would dare to use their divine sense to probe him. After all, using divine sense to probe others could easily cause misunderstandings. When the time came and you were killed, you deserved it. Since Yi Xian was able to receive such respect from Jianghu, it would naturally cause others to misunderstand that Yi Xian had a special identity, or even a super strong expert. As long as he had this worry,
Xian believed that no one would dare to rashly investigate his identity. Under Jianghu's lead, the two of them quickly arrived at a city. It turned out that Jianghu had come here to buy wine from the start. In this city lived a branch of the monkey tribe. The divine wine that they brewed was extremely delicious, and Jianghu had always liked it very much. Scram! Scram! Don't block my way! Jianghu walked in front arrogantly. It could be said that wherever he went, there would be chaos. This guy was completely unreasonable. Even if there was no one standing in his way, he would still run over to cause trouble, let alone someone standing in his way. However, this was not the first time that the people in the city had met Jianghu. Hence, no one came out to stop him. Instead, they respectfully welcomed him into the city. Welcome, first young master. An old man quickly came to Jianghu's side. First, he glanced at Xian, but as expected, he did not dare to probe Xian with his divine sense. Instead, he stood respectfully beside Jianghu. The wine is here, my wine is here. I sent someone to say that I would be here to get the wine today. Rest assured, first young master. Your wine is ready. Haha, good job. I will reward you handsomely when we return. When Jianghu heard that the wine was ready, he excitedly prepared to run out. However, after taking 2 steps, he thought of Xian. Along the way, although Xian had not taught Jianghu much, he had still punished him a few times. The intense pain that came from the depths of his soul and divine spark was still fresh in Jianghu's mind. When he suddenly thought of Xian, he realized that he had been too complacent. If Xian was unhappy, he would have to suffer again. Therefore, at this moment, Jianghu obediently ran to Xian and said, "Big brother, after you." Following this sentence, it could be said that countless people, both in the open and in the dark, were completely shocked. What kind of status did Xian have to make Tianlong Saint Child call him big brother? In an instant, those who were prepared to probe Xian with their divine sense were secretly relieved. Fortunately, they did not use their divine sense, otherwise, they would not even know how they died. As for the others, they silently remembered Xian's appearance and made a decision to never offend Xian. After all, Tianlong Saint Child was already someone they could not go against, let alone Xian's big brother. Even if they were lent 100 times more courage, they would not dare to act presumptuously in front of Xian. Xian did not hold back. At this time, he wanted to use Tianlong Saint Child to create momentum for himself. Although this would put Xian in the spotlight, it was enough to ensure his safety. Normal people would not dare to provoke him. Chapter 2466. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Slap Him Jade Universe Wine. It was one of the more famous divine wines in the demon god's domain. The quality of the Jade Universe wine was divided into 5 grades. What ordinary people could buy was only the lower grade Jade Universe wine. But even so, it was still incomparably expensive and very difficult to obtain. Even with Jianghu's status, he could only make a reservation in advance to get a bottle of Jade Universe wine. Of course, the lower grade was also the divine wine that ordinary people could not obtain. Tianhu led Xian forward. Not long after, they arrived at a pavilion. The design of the pavilion was unique. It was a wine gourd. This was a branch of the Jade Universe wine. The Jade Universe wine was not an ordinary divine wine. Not every city would have a branch store for it. Take this branch for example, it was the only one in the entire region. Otherwise, Tianhu would not have come here personally. Although Tianhu was arrogant and despotic, he did not dare to lose his temper here. Even if this city was the property of Tianlong Divine General, and Tianhu was the young master of this city. However, once they entered the pavilion, Tianhu behaved himself. The person who led the way for Tianhu did not dare to enter the pavilion. It was obvious that the pavilion was independent of the city. "Hey, isn't this our holy son, Tianhu? Haha, I didn't expect to see you here." Xian and Tianhu heard a voice the moment they entered the pavilion. Xian looked up and saw a young man looking at Tianhu with a mocking expression. Tianhu frowned. Not only did he know this person, but he was also unfriendly. Tianhu did not want to bother with that person, so he walked in alone. However, that did not mean that he would not cause trouble for Tianhu. At this moment, that person stepped in front of Tianhu and Xian and said calmly, "Holy son, why are you not giving me face? Are you afraid of me?" "Ha
Holy Son, you actually came here alone today. You're getting bolder. A group of people walked out of the pavilion. Clearly, these people were not friendly to Tianhu. Yi Xian did not understand. Tianhu was the son of Tianlong Divine General. As a holy son, he had always been arrogant and despotic. Why was he afraid of these people? What do you want? Tianhu wasn't exactly afraid. After all, with his status, these people wouldn't dare to hurt him. However, they could still humiliate him. The reason was simple. These people were all holy sons of different races. The holy son in the demon god domain was very good. Holy sons were all registered with the divine master. Holy sons were Holy sons domain. Where all holy sons were registered with the domain's divine general divine lord. Holy sons were god lord of the demon god domain. Divine general lord. Of course, Yi Xian. Of course, studio of course. If not for his status as Tianlong divine general's son, Tianhu's life would be much worse than it was now. The reason was not hard to guess. Tianhu had always been arrogant. He would not respect anyone. Even if the other party was a holy son, Tianhu would not let them go. After offending so many people, Tianhu was isolated. Following that, the situation was reversed. Tianhu could only hide from these holy sons. One had to know that no servants were allowed to interfere in the battle between the saints. Once they did, no matter what the reason was, they would definitely be killed without mercy. Therefore, the battle between holy sons depended on their own strength. Tianhu was only in the illusionary state. He did not have any real strength. Once he fought, the result was obvious. After experiencing it twice, Tianhu learned his lesson. This time, when Tianhu came to get the wine, he did not expect these people to appear here. After all, they were not wine lovers. However, they had come. Perhaps, these people were here to cause trouble for Tianhu. Haha, holy son, why are you not speaking? I'm waiting for your orders. One of them stepped forward and spoke to Tianhu with a look of concern on his face. Then, another person stepped forward. That's right. Why is our holy son so obedient today? Don't tell me he's drunk again. Drunk as mud, drunk as mud. Haha, their heavenly dragon drunk prawn clan is addicted to wine, and can get drunk as mud at any time. Looks like we really came at the wrong time today. Our Lord Holy Son is drunk again. Drunk? There were a few times when Tianhu pretended to be drunk to avoid these people. The heavenly tiger seemed to be awe-inspiring, but in reality, the heavenly tiger also had his moments of suffering. At this moment, Tianhu looked at these people silently. He did not dare to say a single word. This was because he knew that if he answered, what awaited him would be the revenge of these people. Yi Xian looked on silently. He could not help but shake his head. Yi Xian did not need a cowardly follower. Therefore, Yi Xian could not allow this guy to continue acting so wretchedly. Tianhu, who are they? Yi Xian asked calmly. Upon hearing Yi Xian's words, everyone, including Tianhu, turned to look at Yi Xian. Even the onlookers were surprised. These were all holy sons. They could not afford to offend any one of them. However, they did not expect that an outsider would dare to interfere. This was simply courting death. Kid, who are you? We are talking about business. What are you blabbering on about? Get lost. We are in a good mood today. We can't be bothered to argue with you. One of the guys looked at Yi Xian with disdain. Both his eyes and his tone were full of disdain. Yi Xian turned his head and smiled at that guy. However, he said indifferently, Tianhu, slap him. Tianhu trembled. Yi Xian ordered him to attack these people. Tianhu did not dare to do so. However, Tianhu did not dare to disobey Yi Xian's orders. After spending some time together, Tianhu understood Yi Xian's temper. If he dared to disobey, he would definitely be punished. Therefore, Tianhu turned around hesitantly. He looked at Yi Xian and asked cautiously, "B-boss, do you really want me to slap him?" Perhaps it was because of fear, but Tianhu's voice was trembling. "Do you want me to say it a second time?" Yi Xian's eyes turned cold. Tianhu was so scared that he broke out in cold sweat. One had to know that the pain that came from the depths of one's soul was not something that an ordinary person could endure. Slap. It was a resounding slap. Not to mention the onlookers,
Even the group of holy sons were dumbfounded. Tianhu actually dared to hit them. Moreover, it was all because of one sentence from this person. Chapter 2467. Casually giving away ancient resources, the saints were inexplicably shocked. They had dared to provoke Tianhu for two reasons. Firstly, it was because of the rules of the saints, and secondly, it was because Tianhu was weak in front of them. Now, because of this mysterious man's words, Tianhu was so scared that he didn't fear them at all. Then, who was this mysterious person? You, who are you? Do you know who we are? Another saint pointed at Yixian and asked loudly. However, anyone could tell that he lacked confidence in his tone. Yixian turned his head and looked at that person, but just waved his hand casually. This time, Yixian didn't say anything, but Tianhu understood Yixian's meaning. Slap. It was another resounding slap to the face. These two slaps made Tianhu feel a little excited. It wasn't the first time these guys had tried to find trouble with him. Every time, Tianhu would be the one to suffer losses and run away. But this time, Tianhu had actually slapped them twice. These two slaps had made Tianhu walk out of the shadow of the past. Subconsciously, Tianhu had always felt that Yixian was incomparably powerful. Now, with Yixian backing him, it seemed that Tianhu's confidence had returned after these two slaps. Tianhu, do you want to die? Seeing that Tianhu had slapped them twice in a row, these people didn't dare to do anything. Instead, they looked at Tianhu in shock and fear. After all, Tianhu's identity as the son of Divine General Tianlong wasn't just for show. These people dared to bully Tianhu and even cause trouble for him. Deep down, they were probably afraid. They were afraid of Tianhu. They were afraid that one day, Tianhu wouldn't be afraid of them. Then they would only be bullied. Therefore, when this person threatened Tianhu, it was actually a sign of fear. What did you say? Tianhu looked at that person. This time, without Yixian's instructions, Tianhu had already walked towards that person. Yixian nodded in satisfaction. Fortunately, this guy still had some guts. At least he wasn't the kind of person who couldn't support a wall. With some training, this heavenly tiger could still become a good follower. Tianhu walked step by step towards that person. That person didn't expect Tianhu to walk towards him. Subconsciously, he took 3 steps back. Perhaps if he did not take these 3 steps back, Heavenly Tiger would subconsciously feel a trace of fear. However, this guy's 3 steps back had allowed Tianhu to see their true colors. They were just people who bullied the weak and feared the strong. Scram to the side. I didn't argue with you guys in the past because I gave you guys face. Today, you guys actually dared to cause trouble for me in front of my big brother. I think you guys are the ones who are tired of living. It's fine if I lose face, but if you lose face for my boss, can you afford to pay with your lives? Yixian's lips curled up slightly. This Tianhu was quite tactful. He made it sound as if he was afraid of embarrassing Yixian by hitting him. Of course, regardless of what Yixian was thinking, the others were extremely shocked. Tianhu actually hurt this mysterious person because he was afraid of embarrassing him? If this was spread, no one in the entire demon god realm would believe it. However, it had already happened. Tianhu's performance was not bad. Yixian knew very well that by controlling Tianhu's divine spark fragment, he had full control over Tianhu's life and death. Tianhu definitely wouldn't be able to resist him. In order to gain an obedient follower, it was necessary to use both the carrot and the stick. As a result, Yixian casually waved his hand and saw the 3 treasures hover in midair. All right, tell these guys to scram. Take these 3 ordinary materials and go exchange them for wine. I'm still waiting for wine. Ordinary materials. The group of people stared blankly. Even Tianhu didn't collect them immediately. After all, he had obtained 3 ancient resources. The appearance of any single ancient resource would probably cause a bloodbath. Who would have thought that Tianhu's boss would just casually give Tianhu 3 ancient resources? Who would believe such a thing? Even Tianhu's father, Tianlong Xinjiang, wouldn't be so generous. However, the 3 ancient resources were still hovering in mid-air. There was no room for doubt. What's wrong? Not enough. Yixian saw that Tianhu was in a daze and interrupted him. Tianhu finally reacted and quickly said, "It's enough, it's enough. Boss, this is too much." Some people thought that Tianhu was an idiot. He actually thought that 3 ancient resources were too much. If he thought it was too much,
there would be plenty of people here who wanted them. However, Yixian smiled and said, "Just take what I'm giving you. I'll definitely give you more benefits in the future." Yixian was speaking the truth. After all, Yixian was going to groom Tianhu as his follower. Naturally, he had to groom Tianhu. In order to groom Tianhu, a lot of resources had to be spent. Tianhu excitedly glanced at Yixian. He didn't hold back and casually stored the 3 ancient resources into his universe ring before swaggering forward. At this moment, the group of saints who had come to find trouble with Tianhu didn't dare to stop him. Most of them were even envious. After all, Tianhu had a boss who could casually give away ancient resources. It was obvious that he would have a good life in the future. Some people even wanted to run to Yixian and beg Yixian to accept them as his follower. After all, compared to strength, face and whatnot weren't that important. Unfortunately, looking at Yixian's cold expression, everyone knew that even if they begged Yixian to accept them as his follower, they wouldn't stand a chance. Because Yixian didn't care about them at all. If Yixian knew what these people were thinking, he would probably be very depressed. After all, Yixian wouldn't look down on these saints. Even if all of them became Yixian's follower, Yixian wouldn't complain about having too many. Of course, Tianhu wouldn't really exchange 3 ancient resources for wine. One had to know that ancient resources were extremely rare and contained boundless divine power and the power of laws. Whether it was forging weapons, refining pills, or other uses, they would be very useful. For example, one of the 3 ancient resources that Yixian gave was a material for forging weapons. Although it was only a small piece, if used sparingly, it would definitely be enough to forge 6 to 8 peerless weapons. If Tianhu was really that stupid, he probably wouldn't be qualified to become a saint. After obtaining the Jade Universe wine that he had reserved, Yixian and Tianhu walked out of the pavilion. They didn't even look at the group of saints. Only when Yixian and Tianhu were far away did they dare to speculate about Yixian's identity. Some people said that Yixian was a super expert who had accepted Tianlong Xinjiang's request to teach Tianhu. Chapter 2468. Another ancient mystique soon after. Some people speculated that Yixian might be a core member of a superforce. However, Tianhu was already the son of Divine General Tianlong. So who could be more noble than Tianhu? In an instant, there were all kinds of speculations. Some people even speculated that he might be the illegitimate son of the demon god domain's divine lord. After all, the demon god domain's divine lord had never had an heir, so it was not impossible for him to have an illegitimate son. Unfortunately, no matter how they speculated, they could only speculate. No one would give them the real answer. Even Tianhu did not know Yixian's true identity. "Boss, didn't you just say that you would stay in that city temporarily? Why are you leaving now?" Along the way, Tianhu asked Yixian with some doubt. This time, the word boss came from the bottom of his heart. "I don't like the environment there." Yixian replied indifferently. Yixian could not tell Tianhu that because he had caused a ruckus at the Jade Universe wine. Not only did he attract attention, but he also attracted prying eyes. In order to prevent his identity from being exposed, he left. Yixian would only tell Tianhu that he wanted to find a better environment. An excuse that was not an excuse. Unfortunately, Tianhu would never suspect him. When Yixian finally heard the answer, Tianhu immediately began to think. After a while, Tianhu said to Yixian, "Boss, I know a place that you might like." "Oh, tell me about it." Since Yixian did not have a destination, he might as well listen to Tianhu's arrangements. "Boss, it's like this. Our tribe has a manor outside of Starfall Valley. That place is filled with divine energy, and we can sense some star energy from time to time. Moreover, that is our tribe's internal cultivation ground. Outsiders rarely come in. Why don't we go there?" "Starfall Valley? Star energy?" Yixian nodded slightly. Although he did not know where that place was, it was the secret cultivation ground of the Sky Dragon Drunk Shrimp's tribe, so it must be extraordinary. "All right, let's go there." Yixian nodded in agreement. In fact, Yixian knew that Tianhu was returning the favor. After all, Yixian had given Tianhu 3 ancient resources. Not to mention Tianhu himself, even the entire Sky Dragon Drunk Shrimp tribe would owe Yixian a favor. Therefore, Tianhu understood that no one would stop him from bringing Yixian over. The two of them hurried along the way,
but it did not take them too long to reach the Falling Star Valley. The origin of the name Falling Star Valley was because a star had once fallen here. A falling star was not considered rare in the divine realm. The key was that this star contained a trace of star energy. The power of stars was different from the power of laws. It was hard to say which was stronger. However, in the God realm, which was illuminated by 10 suns, it was very difficult to see the light of the stars, let alone cultivate the power of the stars. Therefore, the power of stars was considered rare. Of course, it wasn't that there weren't people in the divine realm who cultivated the power of stars, but the majority of them gave up after cultivating for a short while. Even for the Heaven Dragon Drunk Prawn clan, who possessed such a precious land, there were very few clansmen who actually came to cultivate the power of stars. Moreover, the majority of them came with a curious and fun attitude. Of course, even if it was such a useless secret land, with the tyrannical Sky Dragon Divine General, he would not allow others to enter. Therefore, the Falling Star Valley was naturally deserted. At this time, Xianxia was brought into the Falling Star Valley by Jianghu. Although he saw many pavilions and halls, other than a few servants, he did not see any cultivators.
Boss, this is the place. You can choose whichever hall you want to stay in.
Anyway, at this time, only the 2 of us will be here.
At this time? What do you mean?
Oh, boss, you don't know. In 2 months' time, it will be the clan's 10 years competition.
No one will come here to waste time.
I have already informed the servants here.
Anyway, you can just treat this place as your own home. If you need anything, just let me know.
Jianghu said casually with a smile on his face.
He was very happy to have found a place that Xianxia liked to stay. Are you going back to participate in the competition too? Xianxia suddenly asked Jianghu.
When Jianghu heard this, he showed an awkward expression. Boss, I am the young clan leader.
Of course, I don't need to participate in the competition. Xianxia's lips curled up slightly.
From Jianghu's tone, Xianxia understood that Jianghu did not need to participate in the competition. Because even if he did, Jianghu would only be at the bottom of his peers. Jianghu was known as the son of Saint and had the mysterious ability of Dharma fusion. Unfortunately, Jianghu only knew how to use Dharma fusion. Anyone who knew his background could easily defeat him.
Xianxia was never stingy to his own people.
Even if Jianghu was the divine beast of the demon god's realm, since he was now his underling, Xianxia would not treat him badly.
System: search for a suitable divine ability for Jianghu and give him suitable elixirs and treasures.
Xianxia ordered the system. Although Xianxia knew that he would have to pay a huge price this time, Xianxia did not care.
Ding!
System notification. Found a suitable divine ability, 13 forms of the dragon dominating the heavens.
Ding!
System notification. Host does not have enough faith points to exchange. 13 forms of the dragon dominating the heavens? From the name, this divine ability seemed to be a combination of skills. However, since Xianxia had decided to give Jianghu a divine ability, Xianxia would do as he said.
System: use resources to exchange for the insufficient faith points.
I want to exchange for this divine ability.
Ding!
System notification. Resource exchange successful. Divine ability exchange successful. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the 13 forms of the dragon dominating the heavens. Would the host like to cultivate it immediately?
No need. Give me a physical body.
A moment later, a golden scroll appeared in Xianxia's hand. This was the 13 forms of the dragon dominating the heavens. Although the exchange this time did not bankrupt Xianxia, it was not far off. His faith points had been emptied and more than half of his stored resources had been used up. One had to know that these resources included the resources that Xianxia had accumulated from killing enemies during this period. One could imagine how much Xianxia had invested in this exchange.
Jianghu, come here.
Xianxia shouted to Jianghu. Jianghu did not hesitate and walked to Xianxia's side. In fact, when Xianxia took out the scroll, Jianghu saw it but did not think much of it.
Boss, what's the matter?
Jianghu asked Xianxia.